Well, a very good afternoon. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company. Jeremy isn't here today, but he will be here tomorrow, Wednesday and Thursday, and then I'll be back on Friday, so a little bit of jiggery-pokery in regard to our days this week, but it's great to be here with you. We're talking about the BBC. Greg Wallace report reveals substantial allegations over 19 years. Yet again, another high-profile presenter protected by the BBC, nothing done. And on the same day, the Gaza documentary report comes out, because guess what? The narrator, a child, was the son of a Hamas terrorist, or official, as the BBC says, as they never call them terrorists, even though they are terrorists in Hamas. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about middle-class workers facing a looming tax raid, Labour criticising a medical union for a low turnout in the ballot, but actually their own new rules and a new bill will make walkouts even easier for people who are members of unions. We'll talk about the Royals as well. Harry arranging a peace summit with Prince Charles within weeks. No plans to meet William, though. We'll get all the latest on all of that. As always, I want your thoughts on this. We're asking the question today about whether the Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie, whether it's time for him to go. What do you think? 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can also send me a voice note, less than a minute please. You can send me a WhatsApp text message or give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss between now and 7. Stay with me here on Talk. So 2 reports into the BBC's failings today. One on Greg Wallace, the MasterChef host. They upheld many of the allegations against him. He says he apologises sincerely for them. He was in a state of undress on 3 separate occasions. He says that's to do with his autistic hypersensitivity to tight clothing, and that's why he wasn't wearing underwear. Really, you couldn't make this stuff up. He was interviewed 3 times for a total of 14 hours about all the different allegations. 83 allegations made against him from 41 separate people. 45 of the 83 allegations were substantiated, and he is now gone from MasterChef, the future of the show in doubt. On the same day, there's a probe about the Gaza documentary, the fact that the BBC failed to disclose that the son of a Hamas terrorist was the narrator of the documentary. You'd kind of think that that was quite an important thing. They said that they had a researcher and translator who was looking into the social media of participants. Well, a quick Google by one of our guests coming up later showed that very simply that young man, that young child, was in a picture holding a machine gun with a Hamas headband on beside a Hamas terrorist and glorifying violence. That photo was dead easy for that person to find. Maybe if the BBC had done a little bit of research, they're the world's largest news organisation. They're meant to do these bits of basic research. Well, let's have a look at what the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, has said about the reports into BBC failings today.
I met with the Director General and the Chair of the Board last week. They have put in place some rapid measures to restore public confidence. I'm glad to be able to report those back to Parliament. I'll be writing to the Chair of the Select Committee this week. It is important that the BBC has acknowledged that there have been a series of catastrophic failures over recent weeks. Our national broadcaster is too important for its independence, impartiality, editorial standards to be called into question as they have been over recent weeks. I am pleased that there has been progress, but as the BBC itself has recognised, there is more that has to be done.
Catastrophic failures, the Culture Secretary talking about there. She said rapid measures in place to restore confidence and trust in the BBC. Well, can your trust in the BBC be restored, especially after one of their senior presenters, 19 years of allegations, nothing was done until it all went public. Then they had a proper investigation, 83 allegations from 41 complainants, 45 of those allegations substantiated. Let me tell you about some of the things that were substantiated against Greg Wallace. There were just an absolute litany of different things. 12 claims he made inappropriate jokes and innuendos, 16 reports he made sexually explicit comments, 2 allegations he made sexualized comments to or about someone, 4 complaints that he had made culturally insensitive or racist comments, 3 claims he was in a state of undress, 7 allegations of bullying, 1 allegation of unwanted touching. The allegations went from 2005 to 2024. One would have thought that the BBC would have done something about this completely out of control presenter rather than simply promoting him, giving him pay rises and giving him more shows to do. Jane's been in touch and said many don't care what goes on at the BBC. They haven't been trusted for years. Paying for this is the problem and the licence fee should be scrapped. Well, Lisa Nandy, also talking today, addressed the question of whether Tim Davie should resign.
Look, I asked the board directly why nobody had resigned or been fired over the series of failures that we've seen recently. What I've had in response is an action plan that is aimed at addressing the reasons why some of these failures happened and making sure that they can never happen again. That's what I'm really interested in, accountability and action, which has been too slow in coming. I think the BBC leadership has recognised that, but now appears to be happening. There are a series of measures that the BBC are taking now, not waiting for the outcomes of reviews, which I hope will restore public confidence in the BBC.
There's an action plan. There's an action plan pending the outcome of reviews. Isn't that great? But the good thing is that no one loses their job, apart from Greg Wallace, who does, in fairness, sound like a total monster and someone who shouldn't be anywhere near any workplace. But there's going to be a review. There's going to be outcomes. There's going to be an action plan. Isn't this going to be fabulous? Guess what? The BBC Director General stays. He stays after certain things. He stays after 19 years of allegations of Greg Wallace. He stays after Hugh Edwards and the cover-up there. He stays after Bob Villan and the fact they shouted death, death to the IDF at Glastonbury and weren't taken off air. In fact, they were extended for another 40 minutes. And the Gaza documentary narrated by the son of Hamas terrorist, which wasn't disclosed. What more do you need, Tim Davie? What more do you need to say you can't do your job, this organisation is out of control, you need someone to head the BBC, which I want to succeed. I want it to be an organisation that succeeds in our national broadcaster because we all have to pay for it. I've paid my licence fee. I'm sure the vast majority of people watching and listening have as well. Some people have decided not to, and that's fine, and that's your decision whether to do that or not. I kind of have to for my job. I listen to and watch the BBC every day to find out what's happening in the news. But Tim Davie clearly hasn't got a grip on this. But there's going to be an action plan and there's going to be outcomes pending reviews, and I'm sure that will be absolutely fine. And a rapid plan to make sure trust is restored in the BBC. How can it be restored after these litany of failures? And those are just the 4 that have happened recently. Let's speak to James Price. He's a former government special advisor. James, you're very welcome to the programme. Should Tim Davie resign?
Hello, my friend. Thank you for having me on. Should he resign? I think he's probably the best that they've got. It's a bit like when I say on talk regularly that Rachel Reeves is the best that Labour have got. So
what
getting
a terrifying
rid of her, things get worse. Exactly right. I think that Tim Davie is probably the best they've got. You know, you'll have done this as well. When you walk into the BBC main headquarters, you really do feel that you are in the sort of epicenter of a sort of woke progressivist sludge where everybody might look very different, but everybody thinks exactly the same thing. And Tim Davie's the one person who seemed vaguely sensible and sane. So if you get rid of him, goodness knows who the Labour Party will put in to replace him, because they'll probably have a big say in this. Or if not, who else it'll be coming up by it. And if you don't get rid of all of the other people who missed all of these issues for decades, you're not going to change the organisation.
Well, I don't think every single person at the BBC thinks the same thing, but I know what you mean about the woke progressivist sludge. I was chatting to a very senior BBC broadcaster just after the council elections, and she admitted to me that she absolutely did not see the Reform UK tidal wave of council election results coming. I could have told them, 2 years, 3 years ago that was going to happen. I wonder if we could take these separately, James. First of all, talking about Greg Wallace. I mean, 19 years of allegations. They knew about it and they did nothing.
It's just really weird, isn't it? Because it doesn't seem like he's the most...
But it's not weird. That's the point. The fact is it's not weird. This keeps happening over and over again with these ghastly people.
Well, exactly. But he's not exactly the most sympathetic figure. He's not exactly able to hide behind many of the things that the BBC would normally try and have a blind eye to, except for this sort of late 11th hour, I'm neurodivergent and that's why I can't wear pants line, which is, you've worked in and around journalism and PR for a long time. It's one of the weirder ones I've ever heard, certainly. But why has this guy been able to get away with it? As you say, it speaks to a deep institutional rot that if people manage to get themselves on their shows, then they're sort of almost untouchable. And people who are watching the live stream now can see him there with some kind of gong that he's received at Windsor Castle. Why? How did this guy get away with it? I've not got the answers for you beyond the fact that there is one rule for insiders in the BBC and another rule for everybody else.
It's not just the BBC. It's not just the BBC. I was told by a senior executive in another media organisation, not this one and not the BBC, but another media organisation, when I was complaining about a particularly awful presenter who I'd worked with, and this person said, Peter, there's one rule for presenters and there's one rule for everybody else, and that is unfortunately the case. Can we talk about the BBC Gaza film breaching editorial guidelines? Because a quick Google search by one of our our guests later on revealed that the narrator of this documentary was wearing a Hamas headband, standing beside a Hamas terrorist and holding a machine gun. But apparently the researcher and the translator for this documentary, I use the word loosely, didn't know that the young man who was narrating the documentary was related to a senior figure in Hamas, who the BBC of course call an official, and I'm going to call him what he is, which is a terrorist.
Yeah, well, first of all, you are dead right. They are indeed terrorists. And hopefully they'll all soon be dead or defeated terrorists as well. But I think this one is easier to understand why. And it's the fact that almost everybody inside the BBC wants to believe the very worst about Israelis. I'd go so far as to say an awful lot of them want to believe the very worst about Jews as well, because this seems to happen again and again and again. And you get this not just with the BBC, but with a lot of kind of media-lovey, lefty types, that when something happens, it is a case of what you would call motivated reasoning. Not do I believe this to be true, but can I believe this to be true? And I think one example of this was when that hospital was hit by a rocket in Gaza, and immediately Hamas said, oh, it was Israel, and that got plastered around the world. It was a lie, and it got plastered around the world before the truth had time to put on its trousers. Actually, it was a member of another terrorist organization in Gaza, and their rocket had misfired and malfunctioned and gone and hit innocent people there. And that happens again and again. But I think it's because some of these people just hate Jews. Most of them just hate Israel. They don't like it that Jews are no longer willing to be victims and lay down and take it anymore. And I think that as a result, you get this kind of mad propaganda. There's one figure who pops up again and again and again in all these sorts of TikTok and Instagram videos and official Palestinian Authority videos, and he's been killed 18 times. He's been a doctor, he's been a father, he's been a son, he's been a footballer, and this guy's like an extra in every shot that keeps coming up, because the only thing that comes out of Gaza other than terrorists is lies. And this is an example that, as you said, the world's biggest news organization managed to fall for, and it shows just how rotten and rancid the place is.
Yes, certainly. And we're talking as well about Donald Trump as well. He's in the White House right now. James, we'll leave it there if that's okay. We'll just go straight to Donald Trump in the White House, in the Oval Office with Mark Rutte, who is the NATO Secretary General.
Which is trying to come up with a nuclear weapon, a nuclear bomb. And we did it very successfully. And we make the best equipment, the best missiles, the best of everything. The European nations know that. And we've made a deal today, and I'm going to have Mark speak about it, but we've made a deal today where we are going to be sending them weapons, and they're going to be paying for them. The United States will not be having any payment made. We're not buying it, but we will manufacture it, and they're going to be paying for it. Our last meeting of a month ago was very successful in that they agreed to 5%, which is more than $1 trillion a year, so they have a lot of money. And these are wealthy nations. They have a lot of money, and they want to do it. They feel very strongly about it, and we feel strongly about it, too. But we're in for a lot of money, and we don't want to do anymore, and we can't. But we make the best, and we're going to be sending the best to NATO, and in some cases to maybe, at Mark's suggestion, if we go to Germany, where they're going to send early on missiles. Yeah. And they'll be replaced, and NATO is going to take care of it. It's going to be coordinated by NATO, and they're going to work very much with Matt Whitaker, who's right here, who's a great ambassador, and Matt's going to be coordinating. You better do a good job, Matt.
I will.
But Matt's going to coordinate. He's a very talented guy. He's going to coordinate everything. So in a nutshell, we're going to make top-of-the-line weapons, and they'll be sent to NATO. NATO may choose to have certain of them sent to other countries where we can get a little additional speed, where the country will release something and it'll be mostly in the form of a replacement. And I'd like to have Mark, and again, just a highly respected, pretty young guy, for having had the career that he's had, because he had an amazing career before going to NATO. So and we spent a lot of time together over the last couple of months. And if you could say a few words.
Absolutely. No, Mr. President, dear Donald, this is really big. This is really big. You called me on Thursday that you had taken a decision. And the decision is that you want Ukraine what it needs to have to maintain, to be able to defend itself against Russia, but you do want Europeans to pay for it, which is totally logical. And this is building on the tremendous success of the NATO summit. The 5%, but also the decision to keep Ukraine strong and the decision to increase our defense industrial production. So based on that, that was Europe stepping up. This is again Europeans stepping up. So I've been in contact with many countries. I can tell you that at this moment, Germany massively, but also Finland and Denmark and Sweden and Norway, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Canada, they all want to be part of this, and this is only the first wave. There will be more. So what we will do is work through the NATO systems to make sure that we know what Ukrainians need, so that we can make packages. Of course, in a way, we discussed it this morning with Pete Hegseth at the Pentagon, in a way that, of course, the US will keep on its stockpiles necessary to defend this country. That's absolutely clear. But it will mean that Ukraine can get its hands on really massive numbers of military equipment, both for air defense, but also missiles, ammunition, etc., etc. So if I was Vladimir Putin today and hear you speaking about what you were planning to do in 50 days and this announcement, I would reconsider whether I should not take negotiations about Ukraine more seriously than I was doing at the moment, if I was Vladimir Putin. But when I'm Ukraine, I think this is really great news for them. So I really want to thank you for that. And that means the Europeans paying for it. And again, I mentioned all these countries, we will deal with that. And exactly as you said, it might also mean that countries will move equipment fast into Ukraine, and then the US later backfilling it, because speed is of the essence here. So really, thank you. This is important.
You did a great job. That's a really great job. We've been very successful.
That is the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, who are talking about a new deal which will mean that the US will give many more weapons to Ukraine. This is in light of the worsening relations between Russia and the United States. We've heard a little bit from the Oval Office. We'll hear more after the break. Stay with us.
When it comes to breaking sanctions rules, ignorance is no excuse. you have to make stringent checks when it comes to dealing with sanctioned entities or people to make sure that you are complying, even if you don't think there's a case to answer from the very beginning. You have to show you've gone through the process. So something's gone wrong with the BBC's processes, and given that this is such a high-profile case, it seems incredible that we wouldn't have some sort of action taken that would see heads roll afterwards. But we'll have to wait to see, won't we?
Some breaking news this morning revealed that under the Terrorist Act, 242 people were arrested in the year to June of this year.
That's something you can indulge in as to all the people who aren't going to prison because, well, there's no prison spaces.
So this is a talk exclusive we've been looking at.
I said, you take these cuffs off me and speak to me like a human being rather than a common criminal.
You're just left wondering, does these people who lead us actually hate Britain? Yeah. Do they not love our country and everything that we've stood for?
Whether it's funded by national government or local government, it's all taxpayers' money. Government doesn't have any money of its own. It's all taxpayers' money that's been raised from the product.
I'm going to talk to Peter Bleksley in a second about a few crime stories. Just want to go straight back to the White House, just maybe for another half a minute or a minute, just to find out what Donald Trump and Mark Rutte, of course, the Secretary General of NATO, are saying about this big new weapons deal. This is about America selling weapons to Europe for use in Ukraine.
And that's going to be quickly distributed to the battlefield. Ukraine will take it up. And, say what you want about Ukraine. When the war started, they had no chance. And they still would have had no chance if the equipment, they had the best equipment, because we do make the best planes and missiles, and we make the best military equipment in the world by far. We have new things coming out that are beyond belief, and I'm very excited about the Golden Dome. It's going to give us very strong protection. We've already started that. But they had courage, because somebody has to use that equipment. And they fought with tremendous courage, and they continue to fight with tremendous courage. But they don't have, they're losing on equipment, and Russia's really
taking Donald Trump there in the Oval Office, just talking about this deal with Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, for weapons to be sold to European allies to be used in Ukraine against the Russians. Very interesting quote, actually, from Donald Trump that caught my eye a little bit earlier on. I'll see if I can find it, actually, in regard to Russia, and it was Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin ahead of today's announcement, when he said he talks nice. Speaking of Putin, he talks nice and then he bombs everybody in the evening. There's a little bit of a problem there, and I don't like it, says Trump, uncharacteristically subtle in what he was saying there. But Trump has said the deal has been made to send weapons to NATO to help Ukraine. He's threatened Russia with severe tariffs as well, so both a military and an economic element to that. We'll bring you the latest if Trump or Rutte says anything more significant. Of course, we'll bring you more on that, and we'll talk about it later in the programme as well. In the meantime, Peter Bleksley is with us, the former Metropolitan Police detective who is our crime commentator. Great to see you, Peter.
Thank you for having me.
Quite a number of horrible stories around today, including Constance Marten and Mark Gordon. They have been convicted previously, but they've been found guilty of gross negligence manslaughter over their baby's death. Tell us the detail of this horrendous story.
Yes, so this isn't the first time they've stood trial in regards to this baby, who was their 5th child together. They had 4 previous children, this revolting couple, all of whom had to be taken into care because this couple, this vile pair of animals, were incapable of loving and looking after their previous children. This one, their 5th child, they were desperate to keep, and so they disappeared off the radar, because what should have happened is that child should have been taken into the care of social services immediately, because of all the previous stuff that had gone on, and they essentially went on the run. This is not the first time they have stood trial in relation to those events where the baby was born and they then went on the run. They have previously been convicted of perverting the course of justice in relation to these same set of circumstances, and guilty of concealing the birth of a child. They have also been convicted of cruelty to a child, all born out of the same circumstances, and today they are finally convicted of manslaughter through gross negligence of the same poor baby that was found after they'd been arrested in a carrier bag in a shed covered in debris and detritus. They could not have given it a more unpleasant short life and a more undignified disposal. I sincerely hope they face very stern jail sentences.
The prosecution said the little baby Victoria died of hypothermia after the couple negligently took her camping. It is just absolutely horrendous, and it can now be reported that the two of them are convicted of child cruelty in their first trial in 2024, so we're getting more information out of that, and they're going to be sentenced in September.
Yes, and talking of camping, they bought a tent from Argos in Whitechapel, and I went there to do some commentary for a news channel at the time when they were on the run. This was January of 2023, and they were sleeping under a flimsy tent that they'd bought from the Argos that I visited. And as I did that piece to camera by way of commentary, it was freezing. I had thermals on, scarf, gloves, the lot, and they went on the run with a tiny baby in the midst of winter.
It's just unspeakable cruelty. I hope they absolutely threw the book at them. Let's talk about Mark Rowley. So Mark Rowley, the Metropolitan Police Chief, talked about the force being stretched, the justice system being frustrating. I share those frustrations, but he's one of the leaders who can do something about it.
Yes, he is. He has asked for more money, which of course police chiefs around the country tend to do. And in some regards, I have some sympathy with him, because policing can be a numbers game. But I have sources within the organisation whereby I hear horror stories on a regular basis of a lack of discipline, of real huge strides need to still be made about the culture within this organisation. There are too many people that are not pulling their weight, that do not have the default position of do the right thing. Of course, many do, but there's a considerable number that don't. There's too much infighting. There is now divides being created, sadly, between male and female police officers. There are some male officers that are refusing to patrol with female officers because they fear complaints will be made against them.
Right.
This is creating
if the two of them
divide.
are out by themselves.
Yes,
okay.
This is creating a divide. Okay. Male officers, some, not all, of course, are scared of patrolling and working and operating with females for fear of complaints being made against them. This is the kind of divisiveness that I'm afraid has grown out of some of Sir Mark Rowley's policies. There are still great cops out there doing heroic things, of course, but there isn't the level of openness, transparency and clear leadership that I'd want. And within the ranks of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Rowley is becoming increasingly unpopular.
He's also said some interesting things about black boys in London who are more likely to die by 18 than white boys. He says that's shameful. What do you make of his comments in regard to that?
Well, Sir Mark Rowley has shown his naivety in dealing with the media here, because he's fallen into the trap once again to talk about the colour of somebody's skin in this context. What he should be saying as Commissioner of Britain's biggest police service, as the most senior cop in the land, is that any loss of life is tragic. We are throwing every resource we've got at trying to find those who commit these crimes, because there are still a number of unsolved crimes, whether the person's skin be black or white or brown, and not fall into this trap. He speaks of the past failings of the Metropolitan Police with regards to race. Well, that's been going around ever since the Macpherson report, and I think it's foolish of him to go down that line. Why not stand up and say, we are trying to prevent crime, we are trying to detect crime, no matter who it happens to, instead of being drawn down this uncomfortable route, which is fraught with banana skins, and he doesn't come out of it too well.
Peter, thank you. Just before you go, I know your tour is coming up. It starts in January. Just tell us a bit about that.
January 2026, thank you very much. I go on a nationwide theatre tour delivering a true crime show like no other. Tickets are on sale via peterblexley.com. I can guarantee you 2 hours of gripping entertainment there'll be some humour laced into it as well, and it would be wonderful to see.
I'd very happily listen to you for 2 hours. I think that'll be an interesting, very interesting night out. Peter, thank you very much indeed. Peter Blexley, former Metropolitan Police detective and our crime commentator here at Talk. Just on what Trump has been saying with Rutte, they're still in the Oval Office of the White House at the moment. The US will impose severe tariffs on Russia in 50 days' time if there's no deal to end the war with Ukraine. Trump said that Russia could face 100% tariffs. Let's just hear a little bit more. They're taking questions from the press now. This is Donald Trump and Mark Rutte, the head of NATO. Let's just hear a little bit of what they're saying.
And we'll replace the Patriots with the ones they have, and Matt will coordinate with NATO. But so it's going to be, they're going to start arriving very soon.
And this afternoon, Boris Pistorius, the German defense minister, is visiting Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, and we'll discuss also, I think, on this whole Patriot thing. Norway is involved, so that's on the Patriots, but this whole deal is also about missiles, about ammunition, so it's broader than Patriots.
We have one country that has 17 Patriots getting ready to be shipped. They're not going to need them for them. So we're going to work a deal where the 17 will go, or a big portion of the 17 will go to the war side.
Mr. President.
That can be done very quickly.
Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Yeah, please.
Could this transaction with NATO be viewed as a step towards achieving peace, letting Putin know that now Zelensky has a little bit more powerful tools in his tool chest, and maybe that brings him to the table to achieve peace? So I know that you wanted to do that.
Brian, that's what we've been saying. I think you might have expressed it better if you wanted to.
I'm just trying to
exactly what
it was a summary.
That was a nice summary. I think he's done better than us. He's a very good guy, I can tell you that. But no, it's well said. Yeah, I think this is a chance at getting peace. Or it's just going to be the same thing. I have to tell you, Europe has a lot of spirit for this war. A lot of people, when I first got involved, I really didn't think they did, but they do. And I saw that a month ago, and you were there, most of you, many of you were there. The level of esprit de corps, spirit that they have is amazing. They really think it's a very, very important thing to do, or they wouldn't be doing it. Look, they're agreeing to, they're paying for everything. We're not paying anymore. We have an ocean separating us. I said, we have a problem. We make the best stuff, but we can't keep doing this. And Biden should have done this years ago. He should have done it from the beginning, but he didn't. He didn't know he was there. This guy, what a horrible job they did to this country. And I just hope between the border and this and so many other inflation.
That is the President of the United States, Donald Trump, speaking in the Oval Office. He's with Mark Rutte there, the head of NATO, and some very interesting lines out of that. They're talking about a munitions deal. They're going to sell weapons to NATO, sell weapons to the Europeans, essentially, so that they can then give them to the Ukrainians to fight the Russians. And the US is also going to impose severe tariffs on Russia in 50 days if there's no deal to end the war in Ukraine. Trump has also said they could face 100% tariffs. If there's anything more significant coming out of that press conference at the White House in the Oval Office, we will, of course, bring it to you. Thanks to everybody who's been in touch, including Amy on our main question of the BBC today. Amy says Tim Davie should go, but it will either be someone lower down the ranks that will go, or no one will go at all. I think it's time for Lisa Nandy to say that we are seriously considering removing the licence fee funding from the BBC. That might make them listen, but I doubt it. Angela Varndall says he should have gone after Hugh Edwards. And Hills in Wales says it's time the BBC went altogether, no longer fit for purpose, not trustworthy, and shouldn't be called the British Broadcasting Corporation, as they are quite definitely not for the British people. Dan says with catastrophic failures, a business leader would usually have to step down. Why do the leaders of the public corporations that we pay for never have to take any responsibility? Stuart in Perthshire says, on the Greg Wallace story, John Turode has always struck me as someone who wouldn't have tolerated that behaviour and might have warned him long before things got so serious. I know he's never particularly liked Wallace, but had to work with him. Andrea from Coventry says, Greg Wallace used to give me the ick, drooling over the food, lecherous noises about the food. He was like something from Benny Hill. Good riddance. And a final one before the break from Alan, who says, if we have to pay for this disgusting broadcaster by law, then we, the licence fee payers, should get a say, a vote as to whom is appointed as the big boss. Candidates should apply every 5 years and put their case to the public, a manifesto if you like, and the public elect a Director General on that basis. What do you think of that? 0344 499 1000. Maybe you want to react to the Metropolitan Police, or indeed what Trump has been saying, that breaking news that the Russians could face 100% tariffs and severe tariffs of whatever stripe within 50 days if there is no deal to end the war in Ukraine. The economic side of this, of course, being just one of the weapons at one of the methods at Trump's disposal. We'll bring you, of course, the latest from that press conference ongoing in the White House. We'll also talk to Jack Elsom, the political editor of The Sun, in just a second about quite a number of political stories, including middle-class workers facing a looming tax raid and the crisis at the BBC. Stay with us. Let's just briefly hear from Trump again in the White House.
I always hang up and say, well, that was a nice phone call. And then missiles are launched into Kiev or some other city. And I said, it's strange. And after that happens 3 or 4 times, you say, the talk doesn't mean anything. My conversations with him are always very pleasant. I say, isn't that a very lovely conversation? And then the missiles go off that night. I go home, I tell the First Lady.
That is Donald Trump there. He's echoing sentiments he's made earlier in regard to how untrustworthy he finds Vladimir Putin and that big deal that has been done today between America and NATO. Some weapons there that will go to Ukraine, will help the Ukrainians fight the Russians. Let's talk about British domestic politics here with Jack Elsom, who's political editor of The Sun. Jack, thanks for joining us today. How are you doing?
Yes, not bad, thanks, Peter. Roasting in a very toasty parliament with very little aircon. But yeah, we're getting by.
Almost as if a building hundreds of years old wasn't really designed for these kind of temperatures anyway. Well, I hope you can cool down eventually. Maybe you can take your tie off after this interview anyway. There's a lot politically around middle-class workers facing a looming tax raid. Heidi Alexander was talking on the Sunday shows yesterday and almost sort of let slip the problems that Rachel Reeves is having and the considerations certainly in regard to tax. What's your take on this?
Yes, well, all attention now really focusing on the autumn budget. We know that Rachel Reeves is going to have to raise taxes to stay within those fiscal rules, which she has set herself. She can't increase borrowing day to day. And it looks like the growth is going to come and save her. So it seems that after big retreats on welfare, winter fuel allowance, downgraded productivity forecasts, it looks that she's going to have to raise taxes in some capacity. And as political journalists, we're trying to read the runes in terms of where the axe will fall. One of these came yesterday, like you said, where Heidi Alexander, Transport Secretary, admittedly not in her brief, but obviously, they are given lines by number 10 to go out with, said that people on modest incomes would be protected from tax rises. Now, this seemed to be a bit of a shift in the government's position, because beforehand they said it would be all working people. But if it's just working people with modest incomes, it set hairs running about potential squeezing of the middle classes. Now, interestingly, today, neither Number 10 nor Darren Jones, Rachel Reeves' deputy, who was sent out today to bat for the government, could give any indication about what a modest income means. And are very much pointing to the fact that they still have their commitment not to raise the headline rates of tax on national insurance, income tax or VAT. But we have known this government to be pretty happy to use verbal contortions and gymnastics in order to get around their manifesto pledges. You'll remember the national insurance pledge before the election, which then saw them say, oh, no, we didn't mean it to be the entire national insurance. We only meant it to be on workers, and therefore businesses could lump £25 billion worth of tax rises. But it does seem that we are going to get some form of big tax rises in the autumn, and whether that does not directly hit workers remains to be seen. But remember that workers are always the ones that end up bearing the cost of this, and we've seen that since April, and that national insurance hike kicked in. It's workers who are really paying the price, because things get more expensive in the shops, and people see that in their pay packets. And so, everyone's trying now to figure out where these tax rises are going to come in the autumn. We haven't got much longer to go. Although I think that any tax rises, really, from Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, that said at the last budget, this is a once in a Parliament budget, and she wouldn't be coming back for any more tax hikes. It would be incredibly hard to swallow for British people who are a bit fed up with that.
And one phrase we're going to hear a lot of, I'm sure, in the next few months, fiscal drag as well, because what is a modest income? What is someone on a modest income? And of course, if you get some sort of pay rise to do with inflation, will the tax rates actually go up? And there's so many questions around that as well.
Well, this seems to be a total mystery for the government at the moment, because your viewers will remember that at the last budget in autumn, one of Rachel Reeves' rabbits out of a hat. It was all doom and gloom. Taxes were going up across the board. But one thing which she clung to really rally behind, was that she would unfreeze income tax thresholds in 2028. These so-called stealth taxes, where you get away with actually raising the headline rate of tax. But since 2023, I think it has been, or maybe even longer ago than that, these tax thresholds, which usually are meant to go up with inflation every year to reflect wage increases, have not done so. And therefore, as people get more wages and get higher paid, they get dragged into paying higher rates of tax. Rachel Reeves said that this would be unfrozen in 2028, because keeping them frozen would essentially be a tax on working people, and therefore it would end up breaching her manifesto pledge not to hit working people with taxes. They have now gone very, very quiet on that pledge. And we actually see farcical scenes in lobby briefings with political journalists, where you ask them about this pledge made mere months ago by the Chancellor herself at the dispatch box in the Commons, and they almost pretend that it hasn't been said. And they dodge around the subject. And that, I think, is because that is now a serious option on the table for the Chancellor to raise money. She's been grilled repeatedly in the House of Commons chamber. The Prime Minister has even been grilled about it last week by Kemi Badenoch at Prime Minister's Questions. He would not be categorical that this pledge still stands. And I think that would raise billions of pounds for the Treasury, but it'd also mean that millions more people will be paying higher rates of tax. And so it's a stealth tax. It's a sneaky way of doing it. Again, I don't think it will fly with the majority of British people.
Very, very interesting, and I think very worrying for a lot of our viewers and listeners. If you have some views on this, let me know. 0344 499 1000. Another story about Labour criticising the medical union for low turnout in the ballot. This is in regard to the junior doctors' strike. They can call themselves resident doctors as long as they, as often as they want. I'm never going to call them that. But Rayner's flagship bill is going to make walkouts even easier. So is the government talking outside from both sides of its mouth on this? Just explain this issue to us, Jack.
Yeah, again, it's a classic case of Labour saying one thing but doing another. And so you might remember this employment rights bill, the flagship, basically, union kowtowing bill, which Angela Rayner is putting through the Commons at the moment, scraps minimum thresholds for strike ballots. And so you wouldn't need to meet a 50% threshold of turnout in order for a union to go on strike. But at the same time, you're having, it's basically a big power shift to the trade unions, which obviously fund the Labour Party and have done for a long time. But at the same time, we're seeing Wes Streeting criticising the BMA's decision to go on strikes, because he said it's a low turnout and therefore it's not legitimate. Now, it begs the question, which some papers have picked up today, how on earth can you criticize a union for a low turnout, but at the same time get rid of the very protection in terms of the ballot threshold, which is currently in place? It doesn't seem to marry up. And so Wes Streeting, I think, to his credit, has said that he's not going to give them any more money, and he doesn't agree with the BMA, and he's been out in front of the committee this afternoon saying that any strikes would be outrageous and catastrophic. In which case, why on earth are you getting rid of the protections, which means that you have to get a significant turnout in order to go on strike in the first place? And again, it's one thing of do as I say, but not as I do. And I think for the Labour Party at the moment, they're in a real pickle. I mean, the strikes in itself are pretty scandalous because Wes Streeting gave the junior doctors a 28% pay rise last year. Many people at the time, including us, were saying it's pretty naive to think that in a year's time they won't come back cap in hand asking for more, and you'll be essentially playing whack-a-mole with them in a very expensive game of whack-a-mole with them for the rest of your time in government. And guess what? A year on, and they come back for more money, and we're now looking down the barrel of fresh strikes in a couple of weeks' time.
And there was money for them, but there wasn't money for the pensioners. There isn't money for the triple lock. There isn't money for the winter fuel allowances. There isn't money for welfare. It really is interesting in terms of where the priorities are. Jack, thank you very much indeed for your analysis there. That's Jack Elsom there, who is the political editor of The Sun. Lots more to come on this, and we will take your views as well. Give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Let me know your views on the BBC, on the government's stealth tax raid as well. Also, we've been reflecting on what Trump has been saying as well. The US imposing severe tariffs on Russia in 50 days if there's no deal to end the war in Ukraine. They're also selling a lot of munitions to NATO for Ukraine, saying that Russia could face 100% tariffs. What do you make of all of that? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
Superman is an immigrant, and yes, the people that we support in this country are immigrants, and if you don't like that, then you're not American.
These Hollywood types, these liberal Hollywood types, you know, they live in a world that is not reflective of real America.
That's a privileged white man in Hollywood saying that. Yeah. So they're always the mouthpieces for these weird movements that have nothing to do with what's actually going on outside the gates of their mansions in Hollywood.
When it comes to breaking sanctions rules, ignorance is no excuse. You have to make stringent checks when it comes to dealing with sanctioned entities or people to make sure that you are complying, even if you don't think there's a case to answer from the very beginning. You have to show you.
Well, Donald Trump and Mark Rutte have been in the Oval Office. Mark Rutte, of course, the NATO Secretary General, talking about this new deal. Let's just see what Donald Trump has been saying about imposing severe tariffs on Russia. This is a short while ago in the Oval Office of the White House.
We're losing, I guess they're losing 5,000 or 6,000 people a day. It's actually now more. I was saying 5,000 a day. It's actually more now. Mostly soldiers, but a lot of people in cities and towns that are getting blown up too. It's a horrible war, and it should be stopped. And so if it's not done, if we don't have an agreement in 50 days, that's what we're doing, secondary tariffs. And they're biting. And I hope we don't get to the point where we do, but I've been hearing so much talk. It's all talk. It's all talk, and then missiles go into Kiev and kill 60 people. It's got to stop.
And that echoes a number of things that Donald Trump has been saying over the last few days in regard to Vladimir Putin, saying he doesn't trust him, saying that there are always warm words on the phones when they have their phone calls. And then, unsurprisingly, the bombs keep falling on Kyiv and on parts of Ukraine as well, other parts of Ukraine as well. He says he's very, very unhappy with Russia and has announced plans to deliver top-of-the-line weapons to Ukraine via NATO. Donald Trump also saying he's going to introduce very severe secondary tariffs of 100% if no ceasefire deal is reached within 50 days. Let's get some analysis of this from Rear Admiral Chris Parry. He's a former NATO and Royal Navy commander. Chris, this is another tool in the box, I suppose, both economic and military. What do you make of this plan by Trump? Will it work, do you think?
Well, these sort of things haven't worked up until now because Putin and the Russians are determined to dig in and get what they want from Ukraine. I spoke to some Russians recently, and they said to me, well, we don't care about suffering with our economy as long as you suffer more than we do. And that gives you an idea of their mentality. I think it's going to make a difference to the person on the street in Russia now. I think if President Trump imposes these sanctions, this is not going to have much effect on the trade to the United States. It's gone down from about 28 billion to about 3.27 billion in the last year, every year. So that's, in the past not been that significant. What will make a difference are two things. One is the secondary sanctions, which means that people who are trading with Russia, like India and other countries, are going to be sanctioned if they continue to do that. And also, if President Trump manages to induce the price of oil to come down below a certain threshold, then President Trump is going to have a huge decrease in revenues from his oil and also, by extension, his gas revenues as well.
Yes, in terms of the munitions themselves, are you surprised at this deal? And of course, there is for such a long time, there were thoughts that NATO, which is the bogeyman to Vladimir Putin, and the thought that NATO wouldn't get involved. Is there any sense that this is now not a NATO conflict, or maybe that ship just sailed a very, very long time ago?
Well, I think that's the narrative that President Putin and Russia have been trying to put on this conflict. It's very straightforward. Russia has invaded a sovereign member of the United Nations and taken nearly a fifth of its land. However you try and dress it up, each side now is being armed by its partners and friends. We know that most of the drones that are hitting Ukraine right now are made in China or with Chinese components. The Iranians are contributing to that, and the North Koreans are contributing missile technology and also soldiers as well. So it's a bit of a pretense for the Eurasian autocrats to pretend that they're not involved in a proxy war. I think the problem in the past is that NATO countries have been basically self-denying actions on the basis of what Putin might do. I think President Trump now wants to take the initiative and say, well, okay, let's just see whether you are bluffing or not. He feels strong. He thinks Putin is weak. Putin has reneged on any promises that he made to President Trump earlier on. And of course, the last thing you want to do is upset President Trump because he'll react fairly strongly.
Why on earth do you think Trump was so patient with Putin for such a long time when so many Western allies were saying that there was no need to be, and actually further and stronger action was needed?
Well, I think there was a window of opportunity because there was a lot of low-level noise about Russia being concerned about China's ambitions in the what you and I would call the Far East, what the Chinese call Outer Manchuria, which is Siberia and Vladivostok. And there are other geopolitical games being played here. And I think that was a window of opportunity that President Trump took to say, look, you're vulnerable. China may turn on you soon. You're going to need a friend. So in return, we need peace in Ukraine. That window closed pretty rapidly. And that's a lot to do with, I think, Kremlin internal politics and what Putin's trying to do to survive, if you like, as he passes, quite a big milestone now. He's been in power for 25 years.
And what happens now, do you think?
Well, I think we're going to see a ratcheting up of sanctions. We're going to see, I think, retaliation by Russia and its allies in economic terms. I also think we'll probably see some what I call grey zone warfare going on. You'll probably find the odd underwater cable gets broken. You'll see all sorts of subversive activity taking place in Europe in particular. Whenever America does something Russia doesn't like, Europe seems to get hit by Russian subversion and sabotage and things like that. So we've got to anticipate, I think, that Russia's going to react, but be very careful of provoking America further, I would suggest.
Chris, thanks for your analysis. I appreciate that. That's Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry, who's a former NATO and Royal Navy commander. Thanks also to Rachel, who says, Trump is the best. I wish he was our leader. Criticise him all you want, but his primary concern is always the American people. She also says, lovely to see you today. Peter, says Rachel, thank you. Appreciate that. On Tim Davey, Margaret in Birmingham says, of course Tim Davey should resign. He should fall on the sword and take responsibility for all the failures of the BBC, but should have gone months ago, but I don't think he will. Well, there has been a development on that, and that is that Ofcom have said, the body, of course, that looks into broadcasters and many other things in this country as well. Ofcom says it's going to launch an investigation into whether a BBC Gaza documentary narrated by the son of a Hamas terrorist misled the audience. I can tell them right now the answer is yes. Caroline Dinage, who is the chairwoman of the Culture, Media and Sport Committee in Parliament as well, has summoned Tim Davey, who's the Director General of the BBC, and Samir Shah, who is the chairman of the BBC, to appear on the 9th of September. Why did it take so long? I mean, that's nearly 2 months to get answers here. The committee has published the BBC reply to the Glastonbury questions as well. The pair are going to be asked, Shah and Davey are going to be asked about the internal review of Gaza, how to survive a war zone, which concluded today that the documentary breached editorial guidelines on accuracy. In sport as well, a bit of breaking news in that England have beaten India by 22 runs in the third test at Lord's to take a 2-1 series lead. 2 tests remaining, of course, in that 5-test series. So good news for England's cricket team and bad news for the BBC. So we will talk more about that with Akhil Ahmed, who is the former head of religion and ethics at the BBC. We will ask him about the ethical approach, or indeed the lack of an ethical approach, to Greg Wallace and indeed the Gaza documentary as well. Lots more to come, and be sure to get your call in. We want to make sure you get your voice heard between now and 7 o'clock. The number is 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222, tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, you can send us a voice note as well, which is the same number, 0344 499 1000. Plenty more to come here on Talk. We'll be back with you after the news in a few minutes. Stay with us. Well, a very good evening. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for joining me. If you're one of the car dwellers on your way home, I hope you're having a safe journey and keep it tuned to Talk, because there's so much to discuss this evening between now and 7 o'clock, including a crisis at the BBC on two fronts. We now know that Ofcom has said it's going to launch an investigation into whether a BBC Gaza documentary narrated by the son of a Hamas terrorist misled the audience. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about Greg Wallace and all that he was up to, and indeed has admitted to many of those complaints being upheld. We'll speak to the former head of religion and ethics at the BBC, a very thoughtful guy called Akil Ahmed, will be with us in just a second. We're also talking this hour about the deal that Trump has agreed with NATO, the President of the United States saying that he's going to sell weapons to NATO that will be used in Ukraine. He's fed up with Vladimir Putin, and he's saying that if this isn't dealt with in 50 days, that there are going to be 100% tariffs, economic tariffs on Russia. We'll talk to Rod McPhee about the TV crisis. We'll talk to Sean Bell about the military crisis as well. Also about Prince Harry. We're talking about this a little bit later on, because the Prince Charles summit between Prince Harry's people and King Charles's people, in fact the two men themselves could meet within weeks, but Harry has no plans at all to meet William, so that fought between the two brothers appears to continue. Lots to discuss. Stay with us here on Talk and get your voice on the air between now and 7. Give me a ring, 0344 499 1000. You can text me 87222 with the word Talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, send me a WhatsApp text message, send me a WhatsApp voice message, or indeed give me a ring on the main number 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss here on Talk between now and 7. Well, quite a number of developments since the BBC, these two reports out today. So intriguingly, we have heard about the Greg Wallace investigation, we've heard about the Gaza documentary as well. If you're just joining us this evening, some of the stuff that Greg Wallace has been up to, admitted and been found to have done. There were 83 allegations, 41 complainants, 45 of the 83 allegations were found to have actually happened. He has apologised profusely, he says. 19 years that these happened during. 12 claims he made inappropriate jokes and innuendo, 16 reports about sexually explicit comments, 2 allegations he made sexualised comments, 2 are about someone, 4 complaints he made racist comments or culturally insensitive comments, 3 claims he was in a state of undress, 7 allegations of bullying, and 1 allegation of unwanted touching. That is aside from what has been discussed on the BBC, the damning Gaza report. This was the documentary, I use the term loosely, in regard to Gaza and Abdullah al-Yerzi, a 14-year-old son of a Hamas terrorist. The documentary shelved earlier this year after a major contributor shown those basic facts not put in the public domain, and very easily one of our contributors a bit later on was very easily able to find a photograph of that young man, the 14-year-old, wearing a Hamas headband with a Hamas terrorist and holding a rifle. Now, we're not saying that this 14-year-old is a terrorist. We're not saying that for a second. What we are saying is that he is the son of a Hamas minister and terrorist in that regime. So that is something that should have been brought to our attention, and of course was not. Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, has been talking about this today. She talked about both BBC investigations earlier today.
I met with the Director General and the Chair of the Board last week. They have put in place some rapid measures to restore public confidence. I'm glad to be able to report those back to Parliament. I'll be writing to the Chair of the Select Committee this week. It is important that the BBC has acknowledged that there have been a series of catastrophic failures over recent weeks. Our national broadcaster is too important for its independence, impartiality, editorial standards to be called into question as they have been over recent weeks. I am pleased that there has been progress, but as the BBC itself has recognised, there is more that has to be done.
Well, the watchdog Ofcom is now saying it's going to launch an investigation into whether the BBC documentary narrated by the son of a Hamas terrorist misled the audience. Lisa Nandy was talking about that a second ago. She also addressed the question of whether the Director General, Tim Davie, should resign.
Look, I asked the board directly why nobody had resigned or been fired over the series of failures that we've seen recently. What I've had in response is an action plan that is aimed at addressing the reasons why some of these failures happened and making sure that they can never happen again. That's what I'm really interested in, accountability and action, which has been too slow in coming. I think the BBC leadership has recognised that, but now appears to be happening. There are a series of measures that the BBC are taking now, not waiting for the outcomes of reviews, which I hope will restore public confidence in the BBC.
That's Lisa Nandy there, the Culture Secretary. Well, let's speak now to Akhil Ahmed, who is the former Head of Religion and Ethics at the BBC. Akhil, thank you for joining us again. Great to talk to you. I just wonder whether this rapid series of measures to restore public confidence, will it restore public confidence after two very damning reports on one day?
I think it's going to be a very hard thing, Peter, isn't it, to kind of restore public confidence in one fell swoop. I mean, Lisa should know a little bit better, to be honest with you. She's the daughter of both her mum and her stepfather, a very, very famous kind of like current affairs journalist in the world of broadcasting and television. And she should know as well that there is no way you can ever stop mistakes being made. Mistakes can be made. And when we look at the Gaza thing, the mistake was made by the production company who didn't inform the BBC thoroughly.
Isn't it a bit more than a mistake? I mean, this is something they would have known.
I'm talking about the mistake that was made by, well, according to I've read one of the people who was involved in it has published some of the information. Yeah. I've had a look at some of the information. Obviously, I've not had the chance yet to read the whole report, but I will be doing. But I've seen the information so far. I mean, they did not disclose to the BBC who this child was, who was the parent of this individual. That's what they didn't do. What they're not saying is that they made up what happened, but they didn't disclose that. Actually, Channel 4 News also had this kid in one of the news reports as well. So this was a child that was being touted around, and actually the mistake's been made. But what this really we should do, Peter, as well, is actually, you're right, on this one, there is no, you've got to hold your hand up. You made a mistake, you change how policies are implemented in the future, and you make sure that this doesn't happen again. One of the things that we used to talk about when I was a commissioner, you'd go into the edit suite, and then one of the first things you'd say is there something I need to know? Is there something you need to tell me? Tell me now rather than it be too late?
But we were told
whether those conversations still go on or not, I don't know.
Akhil, I hope they do, but I'm worried they don't. And what
we might not do, because over time, Peter, people forget the reasons why we were so thorough. We brought those in because of issues around viewer trust around 15, 20 years ago, when, you know, some of those kind of like, you know, when we first started to have, you know, these reality type shows.
Yeah, I remember it all. Yeah.
So then we brought those things in. Now,
well, there were serious problems with the you'll remember the Queen, and was she storming off?
That's why we brought
Jonathan Ross and Andrew Sachs and all the rest of it. Actually, what happened with me, weirdly, was I kept starting. That was sort of when all that compliance stuff came in. I was starting new contracts at the BBC. I would have a 3-month contract as a producer, then it would stop and I get a 6-month contract, and I had to take the same courses every time, and I could probably have recited the courses at the end of it on all that compliance stuff. But what I suppose the question is now is, I mean, the BBC had told us previously they had complete editorial control over the Gaza documentary. I mean, they clearly didn't. They clearly, because, and I have, you know, major issues with Israel over this, they should, and Egypt as well, they should allow independent journalists into Gaza. There's no doubt about that. They should allow world journalists into Gaza to see exactly what is happening. What happened is they subcontracted this. A huge mistake was made, something which could have been rectified by the BBC sitting in London, working out who this kid was and Googling him and finding some of the photos that people have been able to find very, very easily. That didn't happen. And Lisa Nandy is talking about accountability. She's saying there's an action plan. Shouldn't the Director General just go?
Well, yeah, that's a very big thing. You know, when you say subcontracted, they don't subcontract. Somebody pitched an idea. Somebody came to them with the access and they pitched it and they commissioned it. Now, whether or not
but they didn't have complete editorial control, Akhil, and they shouldn't have told us they did.
Oh, they did have complete editorial control in the sense that what they would say to you is that they were in charge. Nobody was telling them what they could put and not put in the programme. The mistake that's being made is the production company did not inform them of the nature of the contributors' parental relationship. That's the thing. It's a mistake. It's a terrible mistake, and
it's more than a mistake, though. I'm not saying the BBC necessarily willfully misled people.
No,
what I'm saying is that
we know from the data, we know from the information.
Sure, and I'm not saying that. But did the production company willfully mislead people?
Well, they said that they haven't, and that's where the big investigation will be really in. It's not so much in the BBC's. But BBC's processes will be tightened up, just as they will have to be across all broadcasters. It won't just be the BBC. It'll be Channel 4. Everybody will go in line with tightened up processes. But the thing is, what this does show us is the problem you've got is, and you mentioned Egypt, but it's really is the IDF won't allow any journalists in, as you know, that full stop 100%. They really control Gaza, not Egypt. Egypt is a...
Well, Egypt have a border as well, and they have some role there.
It's a border they don't control. You know that as well. They don't control anything.
Well, I do think it's a side point, but I do think we do need to talk about the Egyptians a lot more than we do, and the BBC does as well.
If they listen to their own public, there'd be and the fact of the matter is, you have a regime in Egypt that doesn't really listen to its own public in the first place.
We'll perhaps leave that for another day, Akhil.
That's for another day. But the thing is, if you can't get in, it's very hard to kind of like do the work that we need to do. And what this is telling us is that we have to think about how you operate in a situation where there is zero. It's very difficult on the ground. Now, yeah, you're right. You can find information out later on after the event, and that's what we will have to learn from this. There are different ways now that you have to basically authenticate how you work in a situation.
But surely the BBC should be able. Surely the BBC, with its huge resources, the world's largest news organisation, a dedicated band of BBC verified producers, surely they should be able to know what is true and what is not. And the whole point, the only difference, you know this as well as I do, Akhil, the only difference between a blogger with a decent phone and a little stand and talking in his kitchen and the BBC, apart from resources, of course, is trust. And if you don't trust the national broadcaster, as an increasing number of people don't, and we'll talk about Greg Wallace in a second, well, then you're in a serious pickle here. And Lisa Nandy talking about rapid measures to get public confidence back. I'm not sure they can get public confidence back when these things keep happening again and again and again.
I think, if you look at studies around the world, Peter, basically what it tells you is that there is a lack of faith in mainstream broadcasting throughout the whole of the world. It's not just the BBC or the UK. It's a global thing, and particularly with people under the age of 30 as well. So I don't think they're ever going to get that back, quite frankly, because it's a global issue. But with regards to this, this isn't the whole of the BBC making this. This is an independent production company making it for the BBC. So they don't have all of those kind of things at their disposal. But we can't get away. I'm not condoning any of this.
No, I know you're not.
We cannot get away from the simple fact that when you make a mistake, you investigate it, you hold your hands up, and you learn from it.
Okay.
I think if they don't learn from this, that's the bigger problem.
Has the BBC learned from how it deals with out-of-control presenters? Complaints were made about Greg Wallace dating back 19 years. Why was he protected? We've seen a number of BBC presenters over a long period of time who've been protected. I'm not comparing what Greg Wallace did to Jimmy Savile, but Jimmy Savile was protected. Hugh Edwards was protected. Again, I'm not comparing the two men. And now we see Greg Wallace protected for a very long period of time, doing things that would be totally unacceptable in any other workplace.
Well, I think the answer is yes to both, if that makes any sense. Yes, that things have got better, and yes, that people are still protected, if that makes sense. If you can have both at the same time.
Yeah.
Because the system. I mean, I teach leadership actually, and one of the things that we teach in leadership is actually your responsibilities in terms of when calling things out, if you see things happening, or if you know of things happening, how to manage, escalate issues, etc. I think there are a lot of people who need to go on those courses again, but there is a bigger problem is that we have still a culture where if something is successful, it's very rare that somebody gets called out. Now, you could argue that they have done that. It's got to the stage where it's untenable and it has to go. I would argue, why did this not happen a long time ago? But again, it goes back to that point. This is a programme made by an independent production company for the BBC. Sometimes the BBC doesn't get to hear about some of the things, but when it does, it needs to action on them. He has been given a warning in the past. The fact of the matter is, when you've read some of the stuff that's come out, it's pretty clear that, I think it's the end of the line, right? Let's be honest with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the fact it's the end of the line, we get that. Nobody can kind of deny that. The fact of the matter is, why did it go on so long? And it goes on so long because of, I think, a perfect storm. independent production company, very, very successful show, and people basically terrified about actually doing something about it. And
Too big to fail.
I feel strongly about that.
Yeah.
Actually, it's very difficult for somebody to speak truth to power, and it's very difficult for somebody in an environment where you are on a 3-month, 6-month, whatever kind of contract.
Yeah.
You might be on a weekly contract. How do you turn around to somebody and say and call out the big star?
Yeah.
And that's the situation we've got to resolve.
Akil, I always learn something talking to you. Thanks for your analysis. Appreciate it. That's Akil Ahmed there, who's the former head of religion and ethics at the BBC, joining us. Great to hear from him. Barry's in Norwich and has given me a ring, 0344 499 1000. What do you make of this, Barry?
Oh, I'm steaming, Peter. I am literally fed up with hearing about the BBC going right the way back through to Jimmy Savile, up to this other guy who's just been done for over 19 years. You know, the blatant bias of the Brexit, Gary Lineker putting up all over Twitter, stuff he's been putting up. The fact being they don't even call Hamas a terrorist organisation, the fact that they are biased in a lot of ways. They're biased on Leave Remain, but in the referendum. And this guy going on about ethics and hard to call people out. How about he used the word morals and morality? You know what I mean? If I saw someone at my work getting harassed sexually and stuff like that, I'd report them. The problem is, right, the BBC is that arrogant because it knows it's going to get the money it needs from the licence fee, right? I personally think if people who work at the BBC or represent the BBC think the BBC is that great, you know, and people want it, then make it a subscription channel, or and make people who want to watch it pay for it, or make it advertised like anyone else. Yeah, and make it an advertising channel. Get rid of the thing as it is, because I don't watch the BBC, but I still have to pay for it.
Yeah.
And I have to pay for that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, right. And at £160 a year.
Yeah.
For what?
Well, exactly. Listen, I do watch and listen to the BBC an awful lot, and I feel I do get value for my licence fee. But Barry, I know what you mean. I mean, there are certain programmes I just won't watch or listen to because I know they are so biased. Really interesting perspective there, Barry in Norwich. Thank you. Stephen Millings in Belfast says Greg Wallace was a victim of poor management. In an ordinary work environment, he would have received a warning at the first instance of his errant behaviour. The BBC didn't intervene once to stop this. That is a simple failure of basic staff management, symptomatic of a company that is poorly trained and lazy, says Stephen Millings in Belfast. Stephen, you're absolutely right. I don't think Wallace was a victim at all, but I know exactly what you're saying and the language you've used, and that I'm not taking any issue with. I will tell you that about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer, maybe 18 months ago, I spoke to one of the people behind the scenes on this station in a way that I shouldn't have, and one of my bosses called me out on it and said, give me a ring, actually. It was 48 seconds. The call was 48 seconds. And by the end of the 48 seconds, I knew exactly that I was not to have done what I had done, not to have spoken to that person that way. I was to apologise, and that I was never to do it again. I was highly frustrated with the situation. I was extremely tired. Those are not excuses. I apologise to that person. We get on famously now. We've worked together since then successfully. There's no issue. But that was the first instance in 4.5 years of doing something that I really properly shouldn't have done. There have been other times I've been told off by management for doing things I shouldn't have done, and that's absolutely correct. But that is good management. That was good management from that manager. He doesn't work for us anymore, actually. But that manager was very good. He did the right thing, and he said to someone in a relatively senior position as a presenter to say, that's not okay, don't act like that. And that is sort of 1% of what Greg Wallace was doing, but that is something that is unacceptable. That's good management. And a lot of the time, the management is lacking at the BBC because they just don't talk to these people who are too big to fail and can't get away with anything. It's disgraceful. I shouldn't have got away with what I did. I apologise to the person. It's over now. We've moved on. And that was the right management to do. And I took my medicine, and that was the right thing. We're going to talk to Rod McPhee, who's the TV editor of The Sun. We'll talk to him about all of this in just a second. And get your comments too, 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
Aides representing the royal households of the King and Prince Harry have been having a little chit-chat, possibly about how to heal the rift. Charlotte joins us now. What is going on?
Well, aides for Prince Harry, two of them, one of them Meredith Maines, who is Meghan and Harry's right-hand woman in Montecito, flew over, met with this other guy called Liam Maguire, who's their kind of UK sort of head of comms, and they went and had a very secret clandestine meeting in St James's with Tobin Andre.
Superman is an immigrant, and yes, the people that we support in this country are immigrants, and if you don't like that, then you're not American.
These Hollywood types, these liberal Hollywood types.
Well, we heard a little bit earlier on what Lisa Nandy thinks of the BBC scandals. Two of them today, of course, two big reports, and we know that Ofcom, the industry watchdog, is having another probe into it. We also know that the Parliamentary Committee on Culture, Media and Sport has summoned the Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie, and Samir Shah, who is the chairman of the organisation. They're going to talk to them on the 9th of September. Seems quite a long way away. Stuart Andrew, who is for the Conservatives, who is the shadow culture secretary, says clearly this documentary breached the BBC's accuracy guidelines. This is the Gaza documentary. I'm glad they've finally come to the right conclusion this time, but it is far from an isolated lapse. The BBC has repeatedly failed to challenge anti-Semitic rhetoric, masquerading as political commentary, broadcast Hamas-linked voices, and is accused of minimising attacks on Jewish communities. This all reveals a troubling pattern of anti-Israel bias, as well as their failure to uphold impartiality. The BBC must urgently reform its editorial standards, enforce accountability, and show it is capable of upholding its duty of public trust. That is Stuart Andrew, the Shadow Culture Secretary, who's just said that. Pete has been in touch with a voice note. Let's hear what Pete has to say.
It's pointless getting rid of the boss of the BBC because he'll just be replaced with another one exactly the same as him. The whole idea is the BBC needs to be gotten rid of.
Pete, really interesting that you say the BBC has to be got rid of rather than necessarily Tim Davie, the Director General. The other big scandal today is, of course, about Greg Wallace, and one man who's been looking into that in a lot of depth is Rod McPhee's TV editor of The Sun. Rod, great to have you in the studio. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Busy day, and I mean, just some of these allegations against Greg Wallace, some of the stuff he's been found to have done, it is really quite astonishing in regard to what what he's actually been found to have done. I mean, some people might say some of it's a bit of banter in the office, but I mean, some of these things, we're talking about racist comments, we're talking about appearing naked. Just take us through this.
So there were 83 allegations made against him. Of those, more than half, 45, have been substantiated. That doesn't mean that the other half have been found not to be true, but they haven't been found to be substantiated. I think the sheer volume, 83, speaks a great deal to what's happened. And there is even one allegation which has been upheld of him of unwanted touching. Now, we don't actually know the exact details of what these allegations are. But I mean, okay, 45 allegations have been upheld against him. That's just a staggering amount. And although it's sort of been not played down, but it will be played down in many people's minds that he used language which was inappropriate. We don't know how inappropriate. It could have been dreadful language. It could have been consistent. And these 45 allegations may just be the tip of an iceberg. And they're just the allegations that were dealt with in this report. So it could have been much worse. The allegations were made by 13 people who worked with him across a range of shows, including the former Newsnight host Kirsty Wark. She contributed to this as well. That's right. I mean, I believe her allegations was one of the ones that wasn't substantiated. But yeah, it's staggering. I think this is one of the most shocking things. How can this be allowed to happen on more than one show? Yes. You would think if it was contained on one show that you could kind of go, right, well, you know, it's something to do with the culture on that show or that particular team. But considering these are multiple shows on the BBC, you kind of think, how is that allowed to happen? And I think there is still this lingering culture where talent is seen as untouchable. Well, untouchable. They're gods, you know. All these productions pivot around them, and you have to pander to them and keep them happy because if they walk, the whole show. Well, it's really interesting because there seems to be, even more so than previously, there seems to be a trend, and tell me if I'm wrong here, you're the expert, Rod, there seems to be a trend of saying, right, that presenter, whether it's someone who, for all we know, is completely blameless and dead easy to work with, someone like Claudia Winkleman, right, she's a popular presenter, we'll give her this show, and this show, right, we're looking for a vehicle for Claudia
Claudia Winkleman, let's give her The Traitors, for example, or let's give her something else.
Yeah.
The thing is that if that person is seen to be a ratings winner, well, then they can command huge fees, and they can basically do what they want.
Yeah, I mean, that's the vibe that's put out there. And, you know, look, most presenters aren't like Greg Wallace. Most presenters aren't like some of the other stars that have been in the public eye over the last couple of years. But the terrible trend that I seem to see happening is that when people are given these shows, in the very beginning, they all seem very upstanding, decent human beings. But, you know, power corrupts people. You know, you know, you've seen this on other shows where people start off quite humble and then they go on the shows, they get a little bit of fame, they get a bit of notoriety, that they start to realise that they really are the star of the show.
To use a wonderful Northern Irish phrase, they lose the run of themselves.
Well, yes, exactly. It's a great way of putting it, but they do. They really do. And it's funny, it's a human trait, isn't it? We're probably all a little bit susceptible to it. But you imagine you're walking into ITV and BBC, you've got dozens, if not hundreds of people around you, all pandering to your every need. You know, you can click your fingers and get whatever you want. It must be hard not to be consumed by that. And perhaps if you're someone of Greg's disposition, then that's going to be doubly so.
Has that, I mean, you know TV really well. Has that always been the culture in TV and we're only seeing people complaining about it now? Because we've seen historically things, I'm not comparing Greg Wallace to Jimmy Savile, but what I am saying is that this horrendous sort of presenter behaviour in lots of different ways and in much worse ways than Greg Wallace did, even though what he did, of course, was horrible. We've seen it come to light years later, and I wonder whether these allegations, which were over 19 years, let's remember, people must have known, managers must have known.
Yes, I mean, I think the short answer to your question is yes, this has always happened. It may well always happen. That's the truly sad thing. And maybe, in a weird way, the very fact that 83 allegations were made against him, of which 45 were upheld, the very fact that there are so many of these perhaps is a kind of warped reassurance for us that people were willing to come forward, that they have been listened to.
But when they knew it was safe to do so.
Yes.
Because if you're a runner on a weekly contract or a I mean, I worked for the BBC for a while, I was on 3-month contracts, 6-month contracts, things like that. You know that you're vulnerable and you know there's no longevity for that. And a lot of broadcasting, I mean, at the moment in this organisation, I'm on a 1-year contract, I've only ever been on a 1-year contract. That is something that you're vulnerable. You can, these things can change like the wind. There was one other organisation I was part of where I was the coming man, it was all wonderful, there was a boss who changed and then suddenly I was nowhere. These things can change an awful lot, and because it's so subjective as an industry, I just wonder whether these people get away with these things because they are told time and time again, you're absolutely wonderful.
100%. You know, I think that in all of these situations, whenever you get these abuses of power, I think we had the same thing with the Russell Brand investigation on Radio 2. There's always a common denominator, which is that the talent felt like they could get away with murder. And the talent had links to the bosses of the show. And that kind of thing comes up time and time again. There's definitely a pattern there, and I think maybe Greg was particularly susceptible to that. You know, he talks about his autism and not being able to read social cues and perhaps behave in what we'd call a normal way. I think his situation was a particularly difficult one because he was already on the back foot. He claimed he didn't come from a normal TV background, for example. He was a greengrocer.
That's fair enough, but also you know what's right and wrong and you know what's acceptable and what's not acceptable.
Yeah.
Where does the BBC stand today? Because we've had this bombshell Greg Wallace report, we've had the report into the Gaza documentary as well. We've had some people calling for Tim Davie to resign. We have the Culture Secretary saying there'll be rapid measures to restore public confidence. Can the BBC get its reputation back, do you think, after all these scandals?
It will take it will take a great deal of time to get its reputation back, and I think it's been an unholy alliance of event after event after event. I mean, you've had everything from Glastonbury, Wyn Evans, you've got the Gaza report today, and then tomorrow it's the annual report of the BBC, and then that will ultimately lead to more scrutiny. So look, is this a coincidence? maybe. But it is a terrible, terrible coincidence for Tim Davie, and there's always fingers pointed and questions asked when it's a Director General's watch and multiple things happen.
How vulnerable is he, do you think, in your professional estimation?
Very vulnerable.
Okay.
I think that there will be people within the organisation who will maybe feel like even if he isn't to blame for these things happening, he should take responsibility for it. I think many people will be saying that he should go as a gesture to sort of say, look, we accept responsibility and this is the price we're willing to pay. But that's down to him ultimately.
Very interesting analysis there. Thank you. That's Rod McPhee there, who's the TV editor of The Sun. Thanks for joining us in the studio. What do you think about all of this? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call, or drop me a voice note on the same number. We'll take your calls next here on Talk. Stay with us. Well, Cliff has been in touch from Berkshire and he says, I'm not defending Greg Wallace, and the autistic excuse for getting his trousers off is interesting. However, he is in his 60s and was a greengrocer. I suspect a lot of his banter and suggestive innuendo was normal for him back in the day. If he is autistic, he would struggle to pick up others' feelings and would not be capable of empathy. Cliff, I know what you mean by that, but also, where was the manager? Hand on the shoulder, quick chat and say, Greg, do you know what, you can't just say that stuff. When it was the 10% of the 100% of what he was up to. Dawn in Chelmsford says, my mother is 100 years old. She recently received a letter from the tax office telling her to complete a self-assessment tax form. My goodness. Stuart says they'll be working out what highly paid position they can offer Tim Davie before he's summoned, Peter. We all know these people always feel upwards into yet another cushy job. Martin in Oxfordshire says, Peter, ethics in the BBC. Ethics is the name we give to our concern for good behaviour. We feel an obligation to consider not only our own well-being but that of others of the society as a whole, said Dr. Albert Schweitzer. Seems to me that the BBC has failed on all counts over many years. Trump has just started talking at the White House. Let's hear what he has to say.
We don't have a deal, then we're going to have to do, we have no choice but to do secondary tariffs. You call it secondary tariffs, which are pretty tough. Which we don't want to have to do, but let's see what happens. But we thought we had a deal numerous times. I'd get home, I'd say, First Lady, I had the most wonderful talk with Vladimir. I think we're finished. And then I'll turn on the television, or she'll say to me one time, wow, that's strange because they just bombed a nursing home. I said, what? So we don't like that. But I want to thank you all for being here and welcome to the first ever White House Summit of Faith and Business Leaders. You're really some of the greatest business leaders in the country. When I looked at some of the names, I said, whoa, that's big stuff we have here today. In fact, before I was president, I would have been very intimidated, but now I'm president, so I don't have to be. But today we celebrate the core values that built this country, and freedom, hard work, risk-taking, and above all, trust in Almighty God. You're very much into God in this room, and that's very nice. You're business leaders who believe strongly. We have some business leaders that don't believe strongly, and somehow you and I don't like them as much. But I want to thank Pastor Paula White. She's been my friend for a long time. And John for convening this incredible group. You know, her husband's one of the most talented musicians in the world. Stand up, John. Stand up. Okay.
Well, that is Trump talking to Donald Trump, the President of the United States, talking to faith and business leaders. He was giving them just a little précis of what he was talking about in regard to the secondary tariffs, the 100% tariffs that are going to be sanctioned against Russia. He said we thought we had a deal. He talked about having talks with Vladimir Putin and how this was what he thought they had some sort of deal. But then, of course, Vladimir Putin went back on the deal. Lots of people getting in touch about all sorts of issues as well. Thank you to everybody on Twitter who has done so. I've been looking at some of the tweets, and Richard says it's delusional to think the BBC is ever going to restore public confidence. They're a corrupt, biased organisation who end up with far too many people in their midst who are of nefarious means for it to be coincidence. And Paul says, I'm never paying another penny to that shower. Let's speak to Nick in London, who is with us now. He's giving me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Nick, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hello, Peter. I find it amazing. The report comes out and calls the Gaza thing a mistake. Well, a mistake is something much simpler, more trivial than that. What they did, apparently, was withhold vital information about the people doing the documentary that needed to be put into the domain to give the whole context of it.
Completely correct, Nick. Completely correct.
That is not a mistake. That is done on purpose. That is deliberate.
It is absolutely key information that wasn't given to the BBC by the independent production company who were making it. We were told the BBC had complete editorial control, but they didn't have the complete facts, did they, Nick?
Well, that isn't complete editorial control then. So one or other is wrong. I loved also Lee Sanandi's word salad of vacuous statements about action and accountability. If you want accountability, people's heads should roll for this. I don't want people sacked for sack's sake, but Napoleon's maxim of shooting the occasional general to encourage the others could and maybe should be used a lot more often, and then perhaps standards would rise. We expect certain standards. I think we're entitled to it.
Well, also, when they say there'll be accountability here, where is the accountability? I mean, this is a very, very serious thing, and you would imagine that a senior BBC executive, maybe not the Director General, but someone who's responsible for this, if you preside over this in your career, how on earth do you then go into another job interview and say, oh yeah, no, I presided over the Gaza documentary, I was in charge of that, signed that off, said that should go on air, well actually now you should promote me or I should go into another job. I mean, how on earth can someone have the brass neck, whoever it was who signed this off, to actually say, well, keep employing me, I am competent, because they're not competent, and this is something which shouldn't be allowed to happen, and we need to have accountability. And it's not accountability if you get a slap in the wrist, because this is a very, very serious thing.
I entirely agree, but it must be that, you know, you fall upwards, you know, failures.
Yeah, failing upwards, yeah.
And so, I mean, I don't get how the production company aren't told, look, your contract with us is cancelled.
Yeah, well, I think that has happened. I'm sure they'll never work with them again, Nick, but there are just so many issues here.
Producers appointing them, the producers commissioning them. You know, no, you are demoted. You are not commissioning anymore until you get your act together. In no other walk of life, in private business, in no other walk of life would this be tolerated for a nanosecond.
Nick, you talk a lot of sense there. Thank you for that. Thanks also to Chris, who has sent me a message on WhatsApp, 03444991000. Say, hi Peter, Nadi's saying confidence in the BBC. I think she also needs for the public confidence in her government. But between the BBC and Labour, they're both full of lies. Steve says, hi Peter, the biggest problem with the BBC is like the rest of the country, it is no longer representative of Britain. John in Woodford says, if you allow journalists into Gaza who will protect them from kidnapping or death and put themselves at risk, the IDF are losing too many soldiers fighting Hamas and doesn't have responsibility for journalists over their own citizens. The US and the GHF, that's the organisation that's bringing the aid in, have put in mercenaries to help with aid, and they're at risk every single day. David in the Cotswolds says, if there was a private company that was as public facing as the BBC, and then the amount of sleaze uncovered as the BBC has had, their shareholders would be leaving in droves. But the BBC don't have shareholders. They force people to pay or send them to jail. Surely this model of business is draconian and out of date. If the human rights lawyers run out of illegal immigrants to defend, maybe they can defend us British taxpayers, says David in the Cotswolds. And Stephen Wheel says, Lisa Nandy will do nothing about the BBC. After all, she wants everybody to pay through it through council tax. I will not hold my breath, says Stephen Wheel. So speak to another Steve. This is Steve in Leeds this time. Steve, you're very welcome to the programme. What's your point on the BBC?
My point on the BBC, you've alluded to it, is that the producers of these shows are effectively managers of the shows. Now, they have a duty of care to their employees to make sure they're not exposed to this sort of behaviour. Now, the fact they've failed to do that, I can't understand why these people don't just sue the BBC itself, because they failed miserably.
Maybe they will. Maybe they will.
But the second point is, nobody ever gets sacked at the BBC. I don't remember ever hearing of a case of how many people at the BBC are sacked for misconduct.
Steve, I worked at Newsnight with the editor, Peter Rippon, who was the editor of Newsnight. He was many rungs above me, always treated me absolutely fine and fairly. But he was the editor of Newsnight, and he was the editor of Newsnight when the Jimmy Savile film that Liz McKean and Myriam Jones were going to show was suppressed, and it was suppressed. He was not sacked, he was moved off to another senior job in the BBC.
Yeah, and that's a reflection of the world we live in. Politicians, the BBC, the civil service, nobody is ever held to account for anything. They always, OK, blame the star, that's fine, blame the person who's done it. But nobody's actually held to account for the fact they've stood there and let them do it. And it's one of the reasons, I think, why most people are turning away from the government, the politics, the civil service, the BBC, because we just feel that all they see is a cash cow, that they're never held responsible for any actions they ever do. And it's just a sad world that we live in, where people no longer take responsibility, hold their hand up and say, you know what, it was on my watch, I'm resigning, I'm falling on my sword. When was the last time you ever heard that from a politician or anybody? It used to happen when I was young. I'm 60 now. I remember politicians resigning when things went bad. Even the Profumo affair, the guy resigned. Nowadays, they just make an excuse and carry on.
It's very true, and they try to stay as long as they can and try to weather the storm, for example, when actually they should resign, and they should take responsibility for these things. Steve, you speak an awful lot of sense, and thank you for your call. Mac in Glasgow says about Greg Wallace, we need to remember that he was employed by a private production company, but the BBC and other broadcasters need to make sure their subcontracted production companies follow procedures properly. You're absolutely right, Mac. It's easy for the BBC and other broadcasters to pass the buck to these companies. In the end, the BBC needs to take full blame for this. Well, what should that blame actually look like? Let us know your thoughts. So 344 499 1000. Thanks to HB, Helena, who says, good to disagree without being disagreeable. Great show, thank you. And Angie says, I applaud you for your honesty, Peter. One of the reasons why I follow you, not many presenters would live on air inform their audience of being told off by the management. Well, I am not perfect. I sometimes do things that I shouldn't do. And yes, that 48 second long admonishing, we have another word for it, but we don't say it at 5:45 in the evening, from that boss made it very clear to me that I should not have been doing what I was doing, and I've stopped doing it, and hopefully I'm a better person and have learned from the experience. Lots more to discuss, including Trump's new missiles for Ukraine, whether they could actually reach Moscow. Also, his discussion there with Mark Rutte in the Oval Office. We'll get analysis from Sean Bell in just a second. Stay with us here on Talk.
vouchers, gift cards, takeaways, driving lessons, even getting stuff from Fortnum and Mason, for crying out loud. Crazy golf. I mean, it does make you go crazy, doesn't it?
It certainly does. I mean, this is no big surprise. I mean, in the last 5 years, there's a thing called the Asylum Seeker Support Scheme. This is taxpayers' money. In the last 5 years, we've spent £6.6 billion.
Well, thank you everybody for getting in touch. We'll take more of your calls and texts and tweets and voice notes a little bit later on. But just for the meantime, I just want to remind ourselves of what Donald Trump has said about selling weapons to NATO. This was a little bit earlier in the White House. He was alongside Mark Rutte, who is the Secretary General of NATO.
Will these be Patriot missiles specifically, or Patriot batteries that you're planning? And when do you
everything? It's Patriots. It's all of them. It's a full complement with the batteries.
And when do you expect them to arrive in Ukraine, sir?
Well, we're going to have some come very soon, within days, actually, because a couple of the countries that have Patriots are going to swap over and will replace the Patriots with the ones they have, and Matt will coordinate with NATO. But so it's going to be, they're going to start arriving very soon.
So Donald Trump there talking about some of the missiles that he's going to sell to NATO. They will then be using them in Ukraine against Russia. Donald Trump, the president, also said he will hit Russia with severe economic tariffs if there is no deal to end the war in Ukraine.
We're losing, I guess they're losing 5,000 or 6,000 people a day. It's actually now more. I was saying 5,000 a day. It's actually more now. Mostly soldiers, but a lot of people in cities and towns that are getting blown up too. It's a horrible war, and it should be stopped. And so if it's not done, if we don't have an agreement in 50 days, that's what we're doing. Secondary tariffs, and they're biting. And I hope we don't get to the point where we do, but I've been hearing so much talk. It's all talk. It's all talk, and then missiles go into Kiev and kill 60 people. It's got to stop.
Donald Trump reflecting on many conversations he's had as well with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, in regard to what's happening in Ukraine, and lamenting the fact that he talked to Melania Trump and said, oh, you know, he'd had a lovely conversation with Putin, and then suddenly some awful tragedy happens and bombs are dropped on something like a nursing home or a children's home or something like that. It is just awful, and of course you cannot trust Vladimir Putin. Sean Bell is a military analyst and former fighter pilot. Sean, we heard Trump say that he had a great meeting with the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte there. In terms of what has come out of this meeting, both economically and militarily, what's your analysis?
Well, good evening, Peter. Yeah, I mean, one of the things we're waiting for is a major announcement. I think there's probably going to be three key elements to that. But before we even get to that, I think the key thing I picked up is that the language of President Trump is clearly, finally, moving away from sympathy with Putin and painting Ukraine as a pariah state into now putting himself behind NATO and Ukraine. And philosophically and militarily, that is significant. The three areas I think that we're looking at, one of which is defensive weapons for Ukraine, the Patriot missile systems, and also the missiles themselves. Clearly, if you look at how particularly the capital Kyiv's coming under nightly attack, they'll be invaluable. The second one is potentially offensive weapons, and I think that's something that we can get into. And the final bit of this is the tariffs. You know, many people have said, myself included, history shows Russia will not stop unless it's forced to stop. That's either forced to stop militarily or economically. There's lots of tools available at President Trump's disposal. To date, he hasn't used them. We wait to see if he's prepared to do that now.
Well, it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Can they force Russia to stop, do you think, using these measures?
Well, I think militarily it's going to be very difficult. I mean, let's be really clear. You know, President Putin at the moment is on the front foot. His forces are advancing in Ukraine. He's conducting regular attacks over the cities. I was looking at the statistics before coming on. These drone attacks, there were 728 on last Tuesday. We're expecting up to 1,000 a night coming up. And of course, most of those actually kill civilians, and so 232 civilians were killed, over 1,300 injured last month alone. That is the way that President Putin is pushing this war. And if you were Putin, as a military advisor to him, I'd say, you know, you are winning, because he's watched the West run out of weapons, America look unstable in support, and therefore I think Russia will feel emboldened. Can Trump stop it? Yes. If President Putin had 100% tariffs imposed on his oil exports and anybody who bought them, importantly, then all of a sudden he could not fund the war machine, and almost overnight he'd be struggling. In terms of Western weapons, much more difficult, because without the West actually directly getting involved, it's going to be very difficult for Ukraine to turn the tide.
Sean, thank you. That is Sean Bell there, who's a military analyst and former fighter pilot. Sorry to end the interview a little bit earlier than I would have liked, but we have some breaking news now, and that is that police have arrested 3 men in their 20s in connection with the murder of Blue Stevens, the 24-year-old man who was stabbed to death in Knightsbridge in London last week. You'll remember that Blue Stevens was wearing a Rolex watch at the time, and that was stolen from him. Detective Chief Superintendent Christina Jessa, who leads policing in central West London for, of course, the Metropolitan Police, said these arrests mark a significant milestone in this complex and unfolding murder investigation. We continue to progress at pace while we retain an open mind around the motive. One line of inquiry is now that this may have been a targeted attack. Increased police patrols remain active in and around the Knightsbridge area. Please speak to an officer if you have any questions or concern. We know that Knightsbridge, of course, is a very rich area of London. It's places where there are Harvey Nichols, Harrods, for example, the Lanesborough Hotel. There are lots of very, very expensive places there. Harrods is in Knightsbridge, of course, as well. And we know that Blue Stevens, this 24-year-old, was wearing a Rolex watch and he was stabbed. And you can see a picture on the screen at the moment, if you're looking at the screen, of Blue Stevens there with his young son. A tragic murder there. Blue Stevens, just 24 years old, clearly a man of means in that he was wearing a Rolex watch. And the fact is that he was stabbed the other day. And we know that police now, the breaking news, that 3 men in their 20s have been arrested in connection with the murder of Blue Stevens, who was stabbed to death in Knightsbridge last week. And just to reiterate what the Detective Chief Superintendent, very senior officer who's dealing with this, Christina Jessa of the Metropolitan Police, she is the lead police officer in central West London, where Knightsbridge is, of course. She said these arrests mark a significant milestone in this complex and unfolding murder investigation. We continue to progress at pace while we retain an open mind around motive. One line of inquiry is now that this may have been a targeted attack. Increased police patrols remain active in and around the Knightsbridge area of London. Please speak to an officer if you have any questions or concerns. So that's breaking news that 3 men in their 20s have been arrested in connection with the murder of Blue Stevens, stabbed to death in Knightsbridge in London last week. Lots to discuss in regard to the BBC. Thank you to Stuart in Perthshire, who has sent me a message to say, I've just seen that Tim Davie has a CBE. He should at least follow Paula Venables' lead. We remember, of course, she was the head of the post office and was embroiled in the scandal around the Horizon network, and so many people still haven't received compensation for that. Stuart says, I saw Tim Davie as a CBE. He should at least follow Paula Venables' lead and return it for bringing the honours system into disrepute. Well, Greg Wallace has a gong as well. I'm not sure what his gong is. Maybe Ryan, the producer, could check what Greg Wallace's gong is, but we saw those pictures of Greg Wallace earlier on in the programme in regard to him receiving a gong at what looked like Windsor Castle anyway. And there do seem to be a lot of people who get these things. Greg Wallace was an MBE, I'm now being told. We're told, you know, a lot of these presenters simply for their longevity, simply for being on screen. Maybe Greg Wallace did a lot of charity work or something like that, but certainly there do seem to be gongs given out for all sorts of reasons, and that's an ongoing debate that happens happens. Of course, he was awarded the MBE and the Queen's Birthday Honours in 2022 for his contributions to food, broadcasting and charity, according to the BBC. I don't think I'm going to get an MBE for my contributions to food. There's not much food left usually by the end of it. But Greg Wallace certainly getting his MBE anyway. Should he give it back? What do you think? 0344 499 1000. We know that there is a lot of controversy around the BBC. We're going to continue to talk about it specifically in regard to the Gaza film breaching editorial guidelines. Jonathan Sacerdoti is with us in a moment. He's a journalist and broadcaster. We'll also talk about Prince Harry arranging a peace summit with King Charles within weeks, apparently, but no plans to meet William. We'll talk to Matt Wilkinson, who is the Sun's royal editor and host of the Sun's show Royal Exclusive. We'll also take a look inside the Sun tomorrow. They've got plenty of exclusive stories coming, including lots of coverage of the BBC. What do you make of all of this? I'm really interested in your opinions today. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Hello, this is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company today. Jeremy's not here today, but he's back tomorrow and Wednesday and Thursday, and I'll be back on Friday. So a little bit of jiggery-pokery in terms of who's presenting when, but Jeremy's back tomorrow. Lots to talk about today, though, between now and 7 o'clock when Kevin O'Sullivan will be here between 7 and 10, especially the BBC. Two damning reports. One about a Gaza documentary where we were not told that the narrator of the documentary was the son of a Hamas terrorist. I'm sure that was very impartial. Not. We're also talking about Greg Wallace, who's been accused of many things, found culpable for quite a number of them, but half the allegations against him. He says he's deeply sorry for that, deeply sorry for being found out, if you ask me. Jonathan Sacerdoti will join us in a second. We'll also talk about Prince Harry, who has been arranging a peace summit with King Charles within weeks, apparently, but no plans to meet William. We'll see what happens there. We'll get the insight from Matt Wilkinson, the Sun's royal editor, and we'll also take a peek inside inside the paper tomorrow. Lots happening, especially their coverage of the BBC, as well as the Oasis gigs as well. A really interesting story about that coming up. Of course, I want your thoughts on all of this. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. Send me a voice note, send me a WhatsApp text message, or give me a ring on the main number 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss before Kevin O'Sullivan at 7 o'clock. Stay with us here on Talk. Well, Lisa Nandy is the Culture Secretary, and she's been talking about the BBC's scandals today. Tim Davie, the Director General, under pressure. Ofcom, the industry watchdog, launching a probe. The Committee at Parliament on Culture, Media and Sport summoning Tim Davie, the Director General, and Samir Shah, who's the Chairman of the BBC, for a hearing on the 9th of September. Why do these things always take so long? Why can't they summon them next week? This is a crisis that is happening right now. Well, Lisa Nandy has been talking about this. Let's remind ourselves about what she said about the BBC investigations earlier today.
I met with the Director General and the Chair of the Board last week. They have put in place some rapid measures to restore public confidence. I'm glad to be able to report those back to Parliament. I'll be writing to the Chair of the Select Committee this week. It is important that the BBC has acknowledged that there have been a series of catastrophic failures over recent weeks. Our national broadcaster is too important for its independence, impartiality, editorial standards to be called into question as they have been over recent weeks. I am pleased that there has been progress, but as the BBC itself has recognised, there is more that has to be done.
Well, Stuart Andrew is the Shadow Culture Secretary. He says clearly this documentary, the Gaza documentary, breached the BBC's accuracy guidelines. I'm glad they have finally come to the right conclusion this time, but it is far from an isolated lapse. The BBC has repeatedly failed to challenge anti-Semitic rhetoric, masquerading as political commentary, broadcast Hamas-linked voices, and is accused of minimising attacks on Jewish communities. This all reveals a troubling pattern of anti-Israel bias, as well as their failure to uphold impartiality. The BBC must urgently reform its editorial standards, enforce accountability and show it is capable of upholding its duty of public trust. That's what the Shadow Culture Secretary, Stuart Andrew, says. And Lisa Nandy, who is the Culture Secretary, Labour's Lisa Nandy, addressed the question as well today of whether Tim Davie, the Director General of the BBC, should resign.
Look, I asked the board directly why nobody had resigned or been fired over the series of failures that we've seen recently. What I've had in response is an action plan that is aimed at addressing the reasons why some of these failures happened and making sure that they can never happen again. That's what I'm really interested in. Accountability and action, which has been too slow in coming. I think the BBC leadership has recognised that, but now appears to be happening. There are a series of measures that the BBC are taking now, not waiting for the outcomes of reviews, which I hope will restore public confidence in the BBC.
Well, the good news is there's an action plan, and I know that Jonathan Sacerdoti, the journalist and broadcaster, Jonathan, there's an action plan. It's going to be fine. Everything's going to be wonderful. I'm sure you will be absolutely sated by that. This is a whitewash. It is ludicrous. It is ridiculous. Tim Davie has to resign. There's no way around this. You've got Bob Villan in the last couple of weeks. You've got last 2 or 3 weeks. You've got Pascal Robinson Foster, who is the singer, and Bob Villan shouting "Death, Death" the IDF, leading a chant of people in Glastonbury, thousands of people. He shouted it back. He was kept on air by the BBC for another 40 minutes. You've got the Hugh Edwards scandal. You've got the fact that there's the Gaza scandal, the Greg Wallace scandal. How many more scandals can there be under Tim Davie's watch?
Good old action plan. I'm pleased they've got an action plan at the BBC. Personally, I don't care if Tim Davie resigns or is fired. I don't care if there's an action plan. I don't care if they fire a couple of mid-range managers who had something to do with this Gaza Hamas propaganda documentary. None of it matters. I think we all know now, after years and years, different directors general, different teams, BBC News, BBC documentaries, all sorts of different departments at the BBC. They've got a problem with Jews. They've got a problem with Israel. It's institutional rot. It's set in so deeply that it seems to go through root and branch, so many different departments. Getting rid of one person won't make a difference. These reports won't make a difference. I mean, they've spent now months doing this report into this Gaza documentary. The report itself is a complete whitewash. It admits a breach of its editorial guidelines for failing to mention that the child who narrated the entire documentary is the son of a Hamas minister in Gaza. The whole thing goes through all this evidence that they had that the BBC didn't know. The production company they paid did know, but apparently didn't think they should tell them. There's a dispute over why they didn't tell them. There's a disputed phone call mentioned in a footnote in the report. And yet, at the end of it, they come out and say, well, we think the production company had good intentions. They were a bit overwhelmed with the production and all the notes for compliance. And
they're a bit overwhelmed, so they just forgot to mention this thing, which was absolutely fundamental to the trust that people would have had in this documentary. And more
importantly, something that was discovered in one night by the incredible investigative journalist David Collier. But he watched the documentary, stayed up overnight, using his skills and social media. He found all of this out in one night. They had hundreds of thousands of pounds of our money. They had a massive team making this documentary. They had months to make it. And this child, we're told from this report, was included in the taster tape at the very beginning of all of this process of the development of the documentary. The development of the documentary, the report admits, started in-house at the BBC. So their attempts to palm this off on the production company don't seem entirely convincing to me. The idea that this was just an oversight, it's absolutely outrageous. If it was an oversight, it shows absolute failure on the part of the director, the co-director, and one staff member in Gaza who they say knew about this. All three of these people, the report says, knew about this. And none of those people thought it was worth mentioning. The claim in the report, it's outrageous, is that they thought that he had a technocratic or civilian role. The guy had the word minister in his title. How can anybody, never mind somebody with knowledge of Gaza or Palestinian society, how can anybody think a minister or a junior minister is a civilian in Gaza? If you are affiliated with Hamas, Hamas is a proscribed terror group in the UK, and this report makes it quite clear. They paid money to his family. They say that that was all right. They've done their sanctions checks. They put him as the main voice of the documentary. That was all right. It was just an oversight. So there's one little failing they made. It's just outrageous. It's disgusting. And if you read the whole report, it's just full of outrageous contradictions. It's full of these sort of rejections of anything. I mean, the fact that they mistranslated the word Yahud consistently from Arabic, it means Jew, to Israelis, so that they basically whitewashed the genocidal intent of the Palestinians who were speaking. They say, oh, that's colloquial Arabic. This is what they meant. Well, that's the point. If you don't translate for the BBC audience that Jew and Israeli are interchangeable in Palestinian speech, you rather remove the piece of information that they need to know, which is that they hate Israel because it's a Jewish state. That's the whole point. The report is so full of this stuff. It's an absolute disgrace. And I hope that Lisa Nandy does something a bit tougher than these, sound bites on the news, just saying how she's waiting for their action plan or they're going to be taking actions. It's just enough. British people shouldn't be taken for fools like this.
I just want to highlight one of the tweets that you've put out. You're always worth reading on Twitter, and you've written the BBC's report into its Gaza propaganda documentary as a whitewash. For example, it claims the production company also employed a translator researcher to check the contributor's social media and did not flag any issues. And there is a particular photograph which we can show on the screen now, and this is one of the children called Zakaria, the BBC featured in the film. As we can see, and I'll just describe this for people who are listening on the radio, this is a child who has a Hamas headband on. He's holding a rifle and he's standing beside a masked Hamas terrorist who also has a Hamas headband on as well. I mean, that was pretty easy to find and shows one of the children. We're not suggesting the child is a terrorist, but he is certainly being indoctrinated with the hate and with the propaganda of Hamas.
Yeah, spot the terrorist. Apparently difficult for the BBC with that image. That image, of course, comes from social media, but they hired someone to check all the social media, apparently.
You had one job.
The report was nothing wrong was found. And about that child, for example, the whole sequence of that child was something I actually revealed, which is that it was entirely edited non-sequentially. So the documentary had a section where they had a big screen, full screen graphic, day 245 of the war, day 245 of the war. The narration referred to specific attacks and locations. There was a map put up on screen showing specific locations. The voiceover explained a specific attack. Then they showed that child, rather unbelievably, we were told he was a volunteer paramedic, this young child, and they had this whole sequence. If you watched the sequence, I saw that he changed shoes about 4 times, and his hair length changed during the sequence that was meant to happen in one day as he was helping them take people into hospital. They say in just 2 paragraphs of this report that took them months that this is all right, this is absolutely fine, this kind of editing under the BBC's rules, because they don't feel that it was intended to look like one day, even though it literally started with a full screen caption specifying one particular day. And they say that it was fine that that happened. They even note that they dressed the child, despite overlooking the shoes and the haircuts, they dressed him in the same T-shirt for each of the filming days. So they admit that the bits were filmed on different days. They admit that he was dressed in the same T-shirt to try and make it look like the same day. The documentary had a caption up for the whole screen saying it was on one day and a map specifying one particular event. And yet they say that it wasn't designed to give the impression of being about one particular part of the chronology of the war.
What on earth is going on? Why can't this report just tell the truth and be really straightforward in all of this?
Because the truth is that they know what they're doing. The truth is that they probably, in my opinion, knew what they were doing at the time. The truth is that now they can see it and we've shown it to them. It's undeniable, but to admit it would be to admit something dreadful, which is that they have a long-standing problem with reporting from Israel. They have such predisposed ideas, such an ingrained tendency to assume that everything that the state of Israel does is wrong and bad and sick and evil, and weirdly enough that nothing Hamas does is any of those things, when the reverse is the truth. One of them is literally an extremist Islamic jihadi tyranny ruling over the people of Gaza and attacking the people of Israel constantly for decades, and the other one is a democratic state fighting an existential war in extremely difficult circumstances. But rather than actually show that fairly, they're constantly sort of reporting on their own gut feelings that this Jewish state's a bit rotten, that these Israelis are doing something a bit wrong, and that these Gazans are all absolutely telling us an absolutely pure and innocent version of what's going on. The truth is, even just the portrayal of children in Gaza, it was like this weirdly chocolate box packaged Western version. One of the other children featured was this girl who we were told was a food influencer with 1 million followers on Instagram. It maybe sounds convincing for a British or Western child, but for a child growing up in this enclave, in the Gaza Strip, under strict Islamic law, in a family, and even that girl, they didn't reveal, there's a crowdfunder for her family that's raised something like €250,000 for that family. They didn't mention that this child effectively in Gaza is rich as Croesus. So all of these elements that they don't mention, if they wanted to make an honest film about the experience of being a child in that horrific war zone, they could have done it. They could have showed many of the complexities, but they didn't show one of the ways in which Hamas tortures the population, puts them in the line of fire, abuses children by manipulating them into these weird propaganda roles that they then feed to the Western media. They didn't show any of that, and this report didn't touch any of that. It just went through this really weird, very BBC thing of procedure, procedure, procedure. Here are our guidelines. Here is how they did or didn't measure up to them. We give them the benefit of the doubt, even though it seems very strange that they didn't think to mention this to us. I think they've got so much to answer for. So much.
Jonathan, thank you. Jonathan Saccardutti there, journalist and broadcaster. Appreciate him joining us. Khaled is in Leicester and has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Good evening, Khaled. Thank you for your call. What would you like to say?
Hi, Peter. Jonathan is still there?
No, he's gone.
Oh, he's gone. I'd like to talk to him. That was pure. Anyway, look, there has to be accountability for every organisation, regardless of who they are. And there has to be accountability, and there has to be a plan of action, and we have to see if laws are broken. And that has to be across the board, Peter. Like I said before, we can't just stick with one side. One side can break all the rules, all the regulations, break every Geneva Convention, break every international law under the book, and get away with it. And on the other side, just somebody shouting on a stage, and not with no action, and not going to carry out that action, they've been persecuted. This is
Are you talking about Pascal Robinson Foster, who is from Bob Villan? Is that who you're referring to?
Sorry?
Are you talking about the person from Bob Villan, Pascal Robinson Foster? Are you saying he's been persecuted? Is that who you're referring to?
I'm saying he just said death. Now, who's going to go from that concert? Who's going to go out and go around?
It's incitement, Khaled, and he hasn't been persecuted because he hasn't been arrested. He hasn't been persecuted.
No, but my point is there is more furor and more anger at him than actually what the IDF are doing on a daily basis.
I think there's a lot of anger at what the IDF are doing. I think there's an awful lot of anger about that.
Yeah, but you're giving this Jonathan Schapp, whoever he is, I never heard of him before, but whoever he is, you're giving him a free role and stating pure propaganda as if.
What has he said that's not true? What has he said that's not true?
No, Peter, you know for a fact, everybody in the whole world knows that even this GTF, it's not
GHF. Okay. Well, Jonathan Sacerdoti didn't. Hold on, Khaled. Jonathan Sacerdoti did not mention the GHF at any point in that interview. So I ask you again, what did Jonathan Sacerdoti say in the last 15 minutes or so that I've been interviewing him that wasn't true?
He's trying to twist the whole facts. He's saying
how? What's he said?
No, he said about the Gazan population. He's saying that they're not as innocent. He's trying to make out as if they're the terrorists and the people who are actually committing terrorism on a daily basis. They're the innocent ones. This is preposterous, Peter. You can't. You need to.
Hamas are in control of Gaza, Khaled, and Hamas. Sorry? Well, they're not in control of a lot of Gaza now, but Hamas have been in control of Gaza. Are you telling me there aren't terrorists in Gaza?
The terrorism that is taking place on a daily basis is done by the IDF as we speak today. Peter,
are you telling me there aren't terrorists in Gaza? Are you telling me that Hamas aren't terrorists?
The IDF are the terrorists. They're the ones who are committing terrorism on a daily basis.
Okay, the IDF aren't terrorists. They're an army of a country which you don't like. Are you telling me that Hamas aren't terrorists?
I'm telling you what is happening on the ground is that people are defending, and you can't say that.
Defending. Okay, was the 7th of October a defensive action? Maiming people, burning people, taking hostages. Those were the actions of people you won't call terrorists, Khaled.
So what you say, Peter, is since the 7th of October and before the 7th of October, everything was,
No, I'm not. You're putting words in my mouth, and you're not answering my questions, Khaled. The question I'm asking you is: are Hamas terrorists? And was the 7th of October justified?
If I was there, I wouldn't have done what I.
Okay, well, you're not saying they're terrorists, and you're not saying that the 7th of October is justified. So I don't think we have very much more to talk about. Khaled, thank you for your call. We'll go to a break now, and we'll talk to Matt Wilkinson in a second, who's the royal editor of The Sun. We're going to talk about Prince Harry arranging a peace summit with King Charles. Stay with us.
face, swinging fines of sort of £15,000 per vehicle that they fall short by. So, you've got to ask yourself if these huge incentives and sticks, punishments are not moving the EV market, there's something wrong with the product. The motorists simply do not want to buy it. And, Heidi Alexander hit on one of the reasons. They're impractical. And there's also the range worry.
Thank you, everybody who has been in touch, mainly on Greg Wallace, actually. John in Cornwall says, I agree with what you say, but what about them wasting taxpayers' money? Wayne Rooney, a multi-millionaire ex-footballer and field football manager, £800,000 BBC contract. Why, meanwhile, make the pensioners pay? Tone deaf, says John in Cornwall. I'll tell you why, John. First of all, obviously a very successful footballer, but also he's never expressed a political opinion in his life, and that's why the BBC employed him, I would imagine, although at a very, very high salary. The BBC is the biggest broadcaster in the world, says someone else. Over 20,000 employees is difficult to manage all the time. But yeah, that maybe, but there has to be some sort of accountability there, certainly. Richard in Norwich says, please can someone ban Khaled from calling us? He's clearly a Hamas supporter and never answers your questions. And Stephen says, that guy, sigh. That's Steve in Plymouth. I want to talk about Prince Harry now, because there have been peace talks between his people and indeed the people from Buckingham Palace. That was yesterday, but Matt Wilkinson is with us now. He's the royal editor of The Sun and host of The Sun's show Royal Exclusive. Great to have you in the studio. What's going on here? Could there be a rapprochement between Harry and the King?
Well, everyone loves a conspiracy, and especially when it comes to the royal family. But what we have here is an attempt, I believe, by Prince Harry and his team to reach out to the King and to be seen to be reaching out to the King. And I say everyone loves a conspiracy. We're trying to work out, how this story is actually leaked. So we only know about it through a set of pictures of Tobin Andre, who was the Director of Communications for the King, and two of Harry's spin doctors. Now, Peter, you know as well as I do that sometimes communications officers maybe have a very high opinion of themselves, and I would suggest that the meeting of this trio is not going to solve the family relationship. It's not going to end the row. It's not going to stop Harry from lobbing insults at the King. It's not going to suddenly make the King, or to suddenly order the King to pick up the phone and ring Harry. What it is to just smooth the waters, open up a certain level of communication and a certain level of friendship. It was meant to be quiet. People weren't meant to allegedly know about it.
Do you think it's just a miraculous coincidence that they happen to be photographed
Well,
together?
I wish I'd got those pictures. So I wish whoever it is that phoned up, that tipped the Mail on Sunday off, I wish they'd tipped me off. But the problem with this is so many people talk within the media. So it might have just been like, somebody had just told somebody else and then word got round. But who does it damage? Whose case does this damage? Does it damage the King? Does it make Harry look stupid? Who does it embarrass? Who's interested?
What do you think?
Well, I think it gives the impression that Harry is making an effort. Okay, so if Harry has approved, as we reported today in the Sun, that Harry approved for his comms chiefs to travel to the UK, and Buckingham Palace reciprocated and said, OK, we will meet you. So it does appear that Prince Harry is making all the efforts. Okay, he sent someone all the way across the Atlantic to meet the King. So if the King continually denies, continually refuses to kind of engage with Harry, then that maybe plays into Harry's hands, because he can see that, look, he sent his whole team over there to meet the King's team and he's still not talking to me. The other issue that I am worried about is that Harry is very much love bombing his father. There was no invite to this meeting to Team William.
Yeah.
Okay. It's all in his recent interviews. He's always talking about how he wants to speak to his father. But look, you can't clear the air, okay, without speaking to the air. The spare needs to speak to the air, and I'm concerned that it may appear that he is just trying to hive off and drive a wedge between
And Harry,
Charles
of course, has spoken in that interview with the BBC, for example. He said that, you know, he doesn't know how long his father has got. His father has had cancer. He's in his late 70s, and that is something that he's very aware of. And yeah, of course, there's a human dynamic here, but there's also a heck of a lot of things that have happened that Harry has done himself, even, you could say, very, very charitably, to put things in the public domain that you and I as journalists have, you know, lapped up and been absolutely fascinated by. But nonetheless, on a human level, why on earth would King Charles actually be in contact with Harry again? Because anything he says, anything he texts or says on the phone or in person, it may just come out in the next book.
Well, that is the point. That is the conundrum that Buckingham Palace have. So if Harry is running around saying, I want to reconcile with my father, I don't know how much time, as you pointed out, how much time I have left, and is seen making all these efforts, and the King, as you rightly point out, says, well, I'm a little bit worried about telling you, embracing you back into the royal family, because who knows what's going to be in book number 2, if it ever exists, or who knows what you're going to suddenly release on a BBC interview. So so the Buckingham Palace have a little bit of a problem here about how they actually play it. And Harry has consistently trashed his family. He's consistently done it for money. He's consistently attacked all of them, from Camilla to the Princess of Wales, not just the King. He's been doing it for years, and I don't think everybody in the palace has short memories. It takes a hell of a lot more than just going on a BBC interview and saying, well, I don't know how much my father has left, I would like to reconcile. We need an apology. Okay, we need him to, you know, literally on a bended knee to say, I'm so sorry for everything that I've done, and do it publicly.
But how likely is that? Because Harry always sees himself as the victim. He always sees himself as someone who has done nothing wrong. Things have been done to him. He's not responsible for his actions. So, you know, knowing them as you do, following them professionally, how likely is it, do you think, that he says, mea culpa, got it wrong, I'm really sorry, Dad, let's be friends, William?
I'm not going to bet this month's mortgage payment on it, let me put it that way, because he's never shown any contrition. They've never admitted to doing anything wrong. And we consistently say this, that if he genuinely, if he actually does want to repair things up with his father before Charles dies, Charles died for many years, yet he has to show make some kind of effort to admit to wrongdoings, and he has never done it. And I think that's what Buckingham Palace would ask for. It's all fine sitting there saying, I want reconciliation and sending your team out, but you need to actually personally do some actual proper actions.
We saw, of course, the Princess of Wales, Catherine, at Wimbledon at the weekend. That was a lovely occasion. She really shone there. And, of course, getting that wonderful piece of advice from the young girl who'd been through cancer herself. That was a very heartwarming story, Matt, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the wonderful thing about the Princess of Wales is how she's interacting with people at the moment. I mean, everybody that she meets, it is warm. Everybody that she meets, she is expressing kindness to, and people reciprocate that back to her. People treat her the way that she treats them. And she loves Wimbledon. We waited about 2 weeks till she turned up, and then we had her twice in 2 days. So I think everyone's delighted to see her. But a couple of weeks ago, we had the situation with Royal Ascot where she pulled out on the morning of Royal Ascot. So we have to give her patience. We have to be patient with her and not expect too much, because she has expressed so many times, very recently, when she went to a hospital visit, where she said it is, you know, it's a tough road recovering from cancer.
And anybody who knows anybody who's recovered from cancer, I know a lot of our viewers and listeners have had cancer as well. It's not linear. It's not one day you feel fine and that's it and it's all grand. It goes up and down, doesn't it? Lovely message from Dawn, very sad message from Dawn, but thank you. Dawn in Chelmsford here says, the sadness for me about the King and Prince Harry is the fact that the King is not allowed to see his grandchildren, and that is grim, really, isn't it? I mean, and also, if there is a reconciliation for Harry, if even that could happen, what about his wife? Because there's so much damage there, isn't there?
Well, Harry's been quite clever in saying that, you know, he can't bring Meghan back because he doesn't think it's safe. So that issue's kind of apart. We can say, okay, well, you can come back, we don't need Meghan. But you mentioned there about the Charles not seeing his grandchildren. Yeah, absolutely, Charles wants to see his grandchildren. He also wants a relationship with Harry. But I've seen William with George, with Louis and Charlotte. What a wonderful uncle he would be to Lily.
He loves kids. He's great with kids, yeah.
So you're missing out. So these kids are also missing out not just on a grandfather, or Charles is missing out not just on being a good grandfather. William is missing out on being a wonderful uncle to these, you know, these boys over in California.
Just speaking of some of the pictures we saw at the sport over the weekend, Louis, of course, is the one who we all think is the character, the third kid from the Waleses, but actually it was George who had that defiant sort of football manager stance, didn't he? Showing a lot of character coming through.
Yeah, George is great. I mean, there's lots of memes when he's watching football that flies around. The relationship that he has with his father. I was talking about the way that William is with the children. children at the moment, they are really free to express themselves.
Yeah.
And you see the way that Charlotte often looks up to her mum so adoringly.
Yeah,
when
yeah.
Catherine gets a round of applause, you see the proud Charlotte looking up at her mum thinking, wow, everyone adores my mummy. And that's what you get with the relationship you have with, particularly with Charlotte and Catherine and George and William, is genuinely really nice to watch.
Clearly a lovely family. Listen, thank you very much indeed. That is Matt Wilkinson, their Royal Editor of The Sun. He's also the presenter of The Sun's show Royal Exclusive. Lots more to come, indeed, from one of your colleagues. It's John Lucas, who's going to join us in just a second. Your boss, one of your many bosses, who's going to tell us what's coming up in The Sun tomorrow, actually. Also, lots more calls, texts and tweets. Thank you to Chris in Starbridge, who has praised my handling of Callum from Leicester, and also Stephen Cambridge says Greg Wallace has an MBE, but why do you want him to give it back? Has he been charged with anything or convicted? Jumping the gun there, Peter. Great show as usual, says Steve. I merely asked the question whether people wanted Greg Wallace to give his MBE back. He has admitted to quite a number of things. I wonder if criminal charges will follow. Clearly he is someone in the spotlight at the moment, as is the BBC. That will be covered, of course, in The Sun tomorrow. We'll find out from John a bit more about that and take your calls, texts, tweets and voice notes in just a second. Stay with us here on Talk. Well, John Lucas is with us now. He is the night news editor of The Sun, and there's plenty coming up in the paper tomorrow. John, good to see you. How are you doing?
Hello, very well, thank you.
The BBC, of course, one of the main stories in the paper tomorrow, reeling from two scandals.
Yeah, not a great day for the Beeb. We knew this report was coming. Greg Wallace, last week, if you remember, he tried to get out in front of this and say, well, I've seen it and I'm cleared of most of the things, but actually, in fact, it's quite damning. He was found to have been not guilty, that's the wrong word, but there was 45 out of 83 allegations made against the former MasterChef presenter were substantiated, and these include a lot of inappropriate jokes and innuendo, but lots of sexually explicit comments, and there were some culturally insensitive and racist comments. 3 claims that he was in a state of undress, they were upheld, allegations of bullying, and 1 allegation of unwanted touching. So, I mean, it's quite a lot that was sort of levelled against him, and BBC career is completely over for Greg. And And also on the same day, we've got this report about the Hamas documentary. So this is where the BBC, the production company working for the BBC, paid, unbelievably, a member of a Hamas minister's family to narrate a documentary about Gaza, which they didn't realise that he was a relation, but
Yes.
you know, that doesn't matter.
Well, the production team didn't tell them.
Well, they didn't tell them, and they've had to pulled it off of iPlayer, and there's big questions about the governance of the BBC. We've just had all this stuff at Glastonbury, where it was Bob Villan and Kneecap, if you remember,
of course,
making these anti-Israel comments at the time. I mean, if you want to go back a little bit further, it's obviously was our big story that we broke was Hugh Edwards.
You were vilified for doing, and then it turned out to be completely
We were
true.
at first, and again, it's a very similar story. Obviously, Greg Wallace is not Hugh Edwards, but it's a very,
protected senior presenter.
Yeah, high-profile public figure, years and years of allegations against him. And the BBC say today that more could have been done. Every time it's, well, more could have been done. You know, there were missed opportunities. We'll learn from the mistakes, but it happens over and over again. So, I mean, Tim Davie is facing, a lot of questions, and he's going to be grilled by MPs. And
it'll be very interesting to see what happens to his role as well. Some people calling for him to resign, Lisa Nandy saying there is some accountability. It'll be very interesting to see what happens.
Well, we'll see where it goes. The other thing, just to say, is that I can't really say it all now, but there is a lot more to this story. Greg Wallace had said in his statement there will be more casualties from this. He calls it a flawed investigation into him. Now, if you pick up the Sun tomorrow, you're going to see exactly what he's talking about. Can't give it away now because I know our rivals watch and listen to talk.
Yeah.
But you'll see that on the front page tomorrow.
Okay. Very interesting. I will be looking for my son, as I always do, first thing in the morning, and indeed last thing at night, usually when I look at the front pages online. Union Flack, this is fascinating. This is a school's Cultural Diversity Day, but a girl has been banned from taking part for wearing a Union Jack dress.
Yeah, well, we almost thought this was a wind-up when she came on. So this is Courtney Wright. She's a 12-year-old girl. She goes to Bilton School in Rugby. And they were having a cultural diversity day at this school, so they said, well, come in attire, it's fancy dress day, essentially. So she went, everyone was going to remember the classic Jerry Halliwell, Spice Girls.
Not Courtney, because she's too young.
Well, she won't remember it. But, I mean, it's iconic. I'm sure she would have seen it. So the idea was that she was going to wear this, so she turned up to school, she had a whole speech written. And incredibly, the teacher said, it's a cultural day, but it's not for this culture. You have that all the time. So I mean, she's only a 12-year-old kid, so she doesn't know what what she's really getting at. So this poor girl, she had to go and sit outside the headmaster's office.
For goodness sake.
They've called the dad, and he had to come and collect her from school. Complete, awful humiliation. The school completely copped to it and said, they've held their hands up. But she had this lovely speech which she didn't get to. She said, look, she was going to say we've got all our British traditions like drinking tea, love talking about the weather, we've got amazing history, kings, queens, castles, let's not forget fish and chips. And she says sometimes at school we only hear about other cultures, which is great because learning about different countries is interesting and important, but sometimes it feels like British doesn't count as a culture just because it's the majority. So she wanted to make this speech, and lots of people say fair enough.
I agree with every single word I've just heard.
And she's a very bright girl, does very well in her exams. So that's
outrageous. That is outrageous. So we'll read all about that in the paper tomorrow. Tell us about Donald Trump as well. We've been covering this story here today. You're going to have coverage of this in the Sun tomorrow about NATO members purchasing billions and billions of dollars in US weaponry, including Patriot missiles, transferring the munitions to Ukraine under this new deal.
That's right. So we were saying about this on Friday, that Trump was positioning himself for big announcement on Monday, and this is pretty good. So he has had a bit of a bugbear about providing US weapons to Ukraine. This is a sort of workaround. So what's going to happen is NATO countries, the European countries, so like Britain, France and so on, are going to purchase billions and billions of these weapons. Then they have the choice to send them to Ukraine. That's the understanding of what will happen here. And Trump basically is sick of Putin running rings around him. You know, he's given him 6 months. Trump's a very tough negotiator, but also he's you know, people have their different views on him. But one of his tactics was to come out and sort of almost praise Putin and say, you know, he's a great guy. We have really great chats, and I think that was part of a strategy to bring him on side. It hasn't worked. Funny enough, listening to Trump today, he actually said he would mention this to his wife, Melania, and say, I had a great call with Putin today. And she went, well, that's interesting, because he's just bombed another Ukrainian city. And I think maybe the wife has sort of turned Trump a bit and made him a bit tougher on Putin. So it's good, and it all comes 24 hours previously. Chelsea won this. I don't know if you've seen the video of it. It's fantastic.
Bizarre.
It's so funny. I mean, whatever you think about Trump, I mean, he, you know, he's a big character with a big ego, and he was loving it up on stage. Even I think he pocketed one of the medals.
Brilliant.
At his club, and he's been accused of doing a John Terry, if you remember that moment when Terry came off. Well, he wasn't even on the bench. But he came on to celebrate Champions League win, full shin pads and everything. So
got a lot of criticism for doing so.
Yeah, very fun. It's very sort of colourful spread we've got in the paper tomorrow on that.
Speaking of colour, high vis. If you just wear a high vis jacket, you can get away with a lot of things, can't you? Yeah, well, it's that old joke, isn't it? You say, like, just turn up anywhere with a clipboard and look official, you're going to get in. Well, this guy, he was desperate to get a ticket to the Oasis gig Saturday night at Heaton Park. He's desperately posting about it online, couldn't get there. So what he did was he got one of those litter grabbers and a high-vis vest, and he sort of just lingered around the gates until someone waved him through, and he spent 30 minutes, actually did pick up some litter, just to like properly blend in. Yeah. But he made his way right to the front and got there right amongst the Oasis fans. So this is a chap, John Spilsbury. He's I mean, that is some serious blagging.
Oh, yeah, it's amazing.
It's quite impressive, really.
Yeah,
isn't
it's fantastic, and he's got
especially when you think of all the people around him who have paid hundreds and hundreds of pounds. They must be quite annoyed to read this
I mean,
story.
It's a bit cheeky. Look, people were trying to break in and climb over the gates, and that will cause a lot of aggro. Yeah. You know, it
was creative, at least.
He blagged his way in. He was creative.
You can kind of admire it in an oddly sort of...
Yeah, you've got to give it to him. It's a bit cheeky. But
it is a bit cheeky.
Yeah, we like cheeky people.
Yeah, definitely. That is great. Well, I look forward to reading about that as well. John Spilsbury, bit of an icon there, and the working headline, don't look blag in anger. I like that. John, thank you very much for the peek inside the Sun tomorrow. That's John Lucas there. He's the night news editor of the Sun. Lots of people getting in touch about the BBC as well. Says this person, I was born in 1966. I grew up with the BBC being a respected organisation. Over the years, there have been so many scandals with seemingly a lack of accountability by the organisation. This added to the BBC's selective reporting and lack of impartiality have led me seeking other media outlets for news coverage. Top of my to-do list is to cancel my TV licence, as I no longer watch any live TV. Well, there you are. Lots to discuss. We'll get your calls, texts, tweets and voice notes. Lots to have a chat about before 7 o'clock when Kevin O'Sullivan will be here between 7 and 9. You want to get your voice on the air in the next 15 minutes? The number to call is 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
But if you drill down to the stats, as I've done a little bit, it's clearly not just, you know, the super rich that are going, but, you know, people that want to make a living, make a business, just don't seem to be wanting to stay in Britain. Don't feel that this is a competitive environment to succeed in. 40,000 people alone moved to Dubai last year, on top of the 30,000 that moved the year before. Those are 2024 numbers. I would hate to think what 2025 numbers are going to be like, and that's just one country alone.
Thanks to everybody who has been in touch. We're going to talk to Nick in Lincolnshire in just a second, but we're going to remind ourselves first of what Lisa Nandy said about the BBC investigations into Greg Wallace and indeed the Gaza documentary. She was speaking earlier today.
I met with the Director General and the Chair of the Board last week. They have put in place some rapid measures to restore public confidence. I'm glad to be able to report those back to Parliament. I'll be writing to the Chair of the Select Committee this week. It is important that the BBC has acknowledged that there have been a series of catastrophic failures over recent weeks. Our national broadcaster is too important for its independence, impartiality, editorial standards to be called into question as they have been over recent weeks. I am pleased that there has been progress, but as the BBC itself has recognised, there is more that has to be done.
That's the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy. She also addressed the question of whether Tim Davie should resign.
Look, I asked the board directly why nobody had resigned or been fired over the series of failures that we've seen recently. What I've had in response is an action plan that is aimed at addressing the reasons why some of these failures happened and making sure that they can never happen again. That's what I'm really interested in, accountability and action, which has been too slow in coming. I think the BBC leadership has recognised that, but now appears to be happening. There are a series of measures that the BBC are taking now, not waiting for the outcomes of reviews, which I hope will restore public confidence in the BBC.
Well, that's Lisa Nandy there, the Culture Secretary. I want to speak to Nick in Lincolnshire, who's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Nick, you're very welcome to the programme. What do you make of this scandal?
Hi, Peter. Yeah, if you've got time, I've got a couple of points to make.
Go for it.
With regards to Greg Wallace and the BBC sort of in general, I think the rule that you get the behaviour that you tolerate seems to be appropriate here.
Yeah.
You know, whether with raising children or with society in general, you know, look at all the shoplifting that's being tolerated by the police below a certain level, and now that's rampant. You know, and it just seems to be that if you put up with this stuff, it's going to be rampant.
I totally agree with that point, Nick, and I think that, you know, you've got to lay down a marker. I talked earlier on about something I'm not proud of. I had a bit of a row with someone and my boss pulled me up on it, gave me a ring about it the next day. 48 seconds was the entire call, and actually by the end of it, I've never done anything like that since. That was like 0.001% of what Greg Wallace has been up to. It was just an argument with someone. But actually, Nick, you lay down a marker, the management lay down a marker, and then people don't get away with this stuff. But there are people who are too big to fail. There are presenters like Greg Wallace who were basically fated and got away with this for a long time. A lot of these allegations go back even 19 years, Nick.
Yeah, 100%. You know, and I think what's the phrase is something like, "Don't allow your children to be someone you wouldn't like."
Yes.
You know, yes. And it's the same with this. My second point, if I've quickly got time.
Go for it.
You and I have talked before about sort of PTSD and combat and what have you. I'm just on my way out the door now to go and meet a friend who's an ex-US Marine, lost both his legs in an IED that killed his entire patrol.
Goodness me. Was that in Afghanistan or Iraq? Or?
Yeah,
okay.
Afghan. But the guy has since written a book. He starred in a documentary that he co-produced. He was in the Winter Invictus Games, just gone.
Wow.
You know, really sort of inspirational.
Certainly a very inspirational person. Will you send me the details of his book, Nick? If you would maybe talk to our producer just when we finish a conversation. I'm in no rush, Nick, but when we finish the conversation, stay on the line, give my producer some of the details. I'd love to look him up. He sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, 100%, and I'm sure he'd be happy for me to pass on his details.
Great.
Yeah, so that was it, really.
Okay, well, listen, I hope you have a good chat with him, and I hope you have a nice evening, and thanks for your points, Nick. I really appreciate those, and please do stay on the line, and the producer will get the details there. Caroline is in London and wants to talk about the BBC as well. Caroline, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hi, Peter. It's going to be a very polite rant. I am I'm beyond raging. That guy you had on, who was telling the truth about the documentary, no one, and I repeat, no one is ever held accountable in this country.
Often feels that way, Caroline.
I don't just want sacking. I want their pensions removed. The BBC, for me, is finished. I will never have anything to do with that programme. What they've caused is the most unbelievable amount of hatred and anti-Semitic rhetoric across this country. Our government are complicit in it. No one is going to be held accountable with the grooming gangs. No one's going to be held accountable with the blood scandals. No one is ever accountable. Become a politician, go into the civil service, create crimes, and you'll get away with it, and you'll maybe be made to appear, or like Sadiq Khan, a sir, who's absolutely devastated and ruined this city. I am fuming. Do you know what, Peter? I'm disgusted. I'm British, and I want to leave. I'm ashamed of this country. I'm so angry. That report was so unbelievably damning, and nothing will be done. And our government are complicit in it.
The BBC say they've got an action plan, Caroline. They're going to learn lessons from this.
Yeah, Peter, do you know how many times we heard?
Well, exactly.
Jimmy Savile, and before I was even born. Okay, so I'm sick of this rhetoric dribble. I'm sick of it. I had to phone you because I'm literally shaking with anger.
I think there are a lot of people who feel exactly the same way, Caroline, and I wonder, just before you go, if I could get your thoughts on what the Conservative Stuart Andrew has said. He's the Shadow Culture Secretary. He says, clearly this documentary breached the BBC's accuracy guidelines. I'm glad they have finally come to the right conclusion this time, but it is far from an isolated lapse. The BBC has repeatedly failed to challenge anti-Semitic rhetoric, masquerading as political commentary, broadcast Hamas-linked voices, and is accused of minimising attacks on Jewish communities. This all reveals a troubling pattern of anti-Israel bias, as well as their failure to uphold impartiality. The BBC must urgently reform its editorial standards, enforce accountability, and show it is capable of upholding its duty of public trust.
Well, I agree, but do you know what I think should happen? The BBC, it shouldn't be anything to do with the government, anything to do with the public. They can carry on making their lies and their BS with everything, and their rubbishy programmes, which they're doing, because no one's watching their programmes. And if anyone wants to watch the BBC, then they can do like a Netflix. They can
pay for it.
I don't think there'll be many people doing that, and it will be the end of the BBC, and good riddance. Honestly, Peter, I had to call you. I'm boiling inside.
Caroline, thank you so much for your thoughts on all of that. There's plenty of strong opinions around on the BBC. I'm sure after the news at 7 on Kevin O'Sullivan's programme, he'll be taking some calls and chatting about that as well. Kevin's here between 7 and 10 today. I should say that Jeremy's back tomorrow. He was meant to be doing today, and then there were some transport difficulties. So Jeremy's back Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and I'll be back on Friday for Drive at 4 o'clock. But as I say, just after the news, Kevin O'Sullivan will be with you. Kevin, hello.
Hi, Peter. How you doing?
I'm very well. What is coming up in your programme?
Well, all sorts of things, but interesting situation in North London, Epping, to the north of London. Now, the local people staged a kind of spontaneous, furious demonstration yesterday. Now, it's based on something, we don't know the truth of it, but basically, these are the facts as we know it. An Ethiopian asylum seeker arrived here something like 8 days ago. Within 3 days of his arrival, he was charged with the alleged sexual assault of 3 local women.
Right.
Now, he's denied these charges. However, I think it feeds right into why this country is sitting on a tinderbox with this. More and more communities are more and more worried that foreigners are coming in with a different...
It's being suppressed, Kevin. It's being suppressed because people have perfectly valid concerns about these things. I'm sure you're familiar with the story that we've covered in Portsmouth, for example, where perfectly valid concerns have been brought up and people have been told, shut up and don't raise them.
So we need to be very careful, because this guy is denying these charges. However, this has happened all over the country. Only recently, a guy from Afghanistan who was billeted immediately in Scotland, within hours of his arrival, had raped a local 15-year-old girl and subsequently got 12 years for that. In Ballymena, across the over in Ireland.
In Northern Ireland,
those riots were based on the fact that two Romanian kids, 14-year-old migrants, were accused, have been charged with the rape of a local girl. Now, it's bad enough if these asylum seekers commit offences. They break our laws. But if they start being perceived to break our laws in terms of sexual offences, you're going to find there's going to be a lot of trouble. So we will be talking about this. We'll be talking about